ICAIOS. Jadi masih orang yang sama, mudah-mudahan semangat ini bisa kita terus lanjutkan. Di RICIS yang pertama saya merasa apakah ini akan berlanjut seperti itu ya, sampai saya ingat Warek 1 itu meyakinkan insya Allah ini akan berlanjut, karena waktu itu semacam konferensi internasional pertama ya, yang agak besar yang kita buat di UIN Araniri, dan bahwa kita ada di ruangan ini pada hari ini, kekhawatiran saya beberapa tahun yang lalu itu terjawab, bahwa semangat untuk melestarikan diskusi dialektika keilmuan untuk membangun peradaban keilmuan itu tetap ada semangatnya bersama kita semua, dan partisipasi kita semua pada hari ini adalah mukaddimah, karena ini hanya pengantar sifatnya. Saya berterima kasih, saya mengucapkan selamat datang atas nama panitia, atas nama Pasca Sarjana, bahwa partisipasi kita semua akan membuat acara ini menghasilkan pikiran-pikiran yang berharga, pikiran-pikiran yang bermakna untuk pengembangan ilmu pengetahuan. Kepada Bapak Ibu yang berasal dari luar Aceh, dari luar negeri, terima kasih. Billahi taufiq wal hidayah. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Alhamdulillahirabbil alamin wa bihi nasta'inu ala umuri dunya waddin wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajmain. Asyhadu an la ilaha illallah wa la syarika lahu wa asyhadu anna Muhammadan abduhu wa rasuluhu la nabiyya ba'dah. Terima kasih Direktur Pasca Sarjana Prof. Eka Sri Mulyani, and all of the distinguished speakers that attend this conference. Welcome also for our guests ya, from outside Aceh ya. Terima kasih sekali lagi karena tadi malam udah ada pembukaan ya, jadi udah pembukaan. Hari ini kita sebenarnya sudah mulai terus dan kita sudah molor ya dari waktu yang kita rencanakan. So in this session, we have two distinguished speakers, Dr. Marakabi and Prof. Serbanu, that with us today. Bu Serbanu ini sebenarnya juga bukan yang asing hadir di kita, karena saya masih teringat, saya nggak tahu masih teringat juga Ibu, saya undang juga menjadi pembicara di ruang sidang direktur waktu itu ya. Dan beliau ini sedikit saya perkenalkan, beliau dari National University of Singapore and US English. Alright, so Bu Serbanu is associate professor in the Malay Studies Department at the National University of Singapore. She has published numerous articles in journals and also books chapters, and her research interest is the Malay world and Southeast Asia in general in the early modern period, focusing on history, gender studies, and Islam. And today, I don't know, she will deliver his thought, his speech, around 20 minutes, I think. So it's time for you. Time for yours, yeah.
It's already open. It's not connected. That one? No, this is.
put the same in the whole thing. But I need my presenter's view. Dia buka ni. Ada semua. See first. Yeah, and the slideshow. Where is my slideshow? Okay, where's my slideshow? And then the presenter's notes in there. Maaf kerana technical interruption ya. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Selamat pagi semua. Organize ya konferensi ini. Jadi saya akan mulakan presentasi saya dalam bahasa Inggeris, tapi saya akan cuba mungkin multiple language, cuba maybe switch, tapi basically in English. Yeah. Okay. So the title of my research and my talk today is Connecting Islamic Past and Futures: Insights from Hybrid and Cosmopolitan Histories of Aceh Darussalam. I think in line with the conference theme of remembering the past and remaking the future, I would like to invite you to travel with me to the past, to Samudra Pasi and to Aceh Darussalam, in order for us to know a little bit more about this slice of history. I think as a historian, I think it's very important, and it's my firm belief that you need to know where you come from for you to understand who you are now and to plan and to know where you belong in the future. So in line with today's talk, I would bring you a slice of Aceh's history for you to remember. But the question here is, which past do you think? Which past do you know? Which past do you want to remember? And which past do you want to select in order for you to understand the present and for you to connect to the future? I think this is a very important question. So my presentation today hopefully can give you some insights into rethinking the past for us to perhaps understand our present. So what I would like to do today is to revisit early Islamization in this part of the world, especially Samudra Pasi, because as everyone know, so the origins, the debates and new insights. Professor Amirul Hadi yesterday asked me, Samudra Pasi, what else can we know about Samudra Pasi? So I told him, okay, we will share a little bit more about Samudra Pasi today. And I think for almost all the audience here, Acehnese who are very, very about their history, again, I think most of you will know about Samudra Pasi. But what I want to do today is to try and look at it from a new approach, new lens, new lensa, dan juga dari examining the issue of texts and context. Yeah? Bagaimana dari teks kami dapat memahami konteks history yang kami sedang meneliti. Juga the question of positionality, the vintage point. Where are you looking at this history from? So what I like to do is to turn the lens around and to try and look at it. Privileged empires. We tend to privilege Arabia, Middle East, India, China, but Southeast Asia usually is forgotten. And yet there is a gap in between all these connections, and I think this gap that is very much played by the role of Southeast Asians, especially as you can see later, Samudra Pasi and Aceh, needs to be bridged, needs to be filled. So from this vantage point, what can we learn? I start off from Hikayat Raja Pasai. Again here, most of you know this. I will not be able to explain this more because of time. But I just want to show that, what we can look at in terms of the Hikayat Raja Pasai, because it is the beginning of everything. It tells you about the origin story of these people. Although I think it has been very, very well studied, by a lot of scholars, and it's one of the oldest manuscripts in this part of the world. I think by looking at it with fresh eyes, we can perhaps gain new insights. So very much to thank and to move from this scholars' understanding and research on Hikayat Raja Pasai, especially if you look at Chinese scholars, for example, Tengku Allahyarham Tengku Iskandar dan juga Allahyarham Ibrahim Alfian, they have done a lot of work here. But what I would like to understanding the challenges, trying to use these sources, because in this source there is history, there is myth, there is folktale, and I think all of you know that. But I think it deserves a very important study in its own terms. Jadi saya sebagai seorang historian, I'm not really looking at what is fact and what is fiction here, but I'm trying to see what is the meaning of the whole manuscript. And I think this is very, very important, because this community and the origin story for us to understand and for us to interpret. Hikayat Raja Pasai, as I've said, many people have looked at it, have studied it, but what I would like to do is to pick up the story and to look at the issue or the word or the geography of Makbri in this particular hikayat. I don't have time to look at the other sort of stories that was very much part of the conversion story of Mira Silu, who became a Muslim and became Malikul Saleh. But here I would just like to take a part of that conversion story and follow and investigate this issue of Makbri. Many scholars have looked at Makbri, and there is a school of thought talking about the Malabar school of thought, where Islam came from Malabar, but there is not much investigation on this. I will explain later, and what I would like to do is to further the debate by Marison in terms of why and how Islam came to this part of the world from Malabar. So very quickly here, I just want to highlight, Makbri was mentioned 6 times in the Hikayat Raja Pasai. Mecca was also mentioned, but Makbri was very much mentioned together with Mecca. The role of the Sheikh Ismail from Mecca, and the role of the fakir from Makba, who converted Mira Silu to Islam. So who was this fakir? Turned out that the fakir was Sultan Muhammad of Makbri, and he was the descendant, according to the Hikayat Raja Pasai, of Hadrat Abu Bakar as-Siddiq, and he was the one who abdicated from Makbri. He joined Sheikh Ismail from Mecca when the ship arrived in Makbri, and together with the Sheikh, he traveled to Samudra Pasi. He was the one who, because of the dream that he had of the Prophet, so he got the Quran from this fakir, and on the inauguration of Ismail, according to the Hikayat, went back to Mecca, but the fakir remained in Samudra Pasai to add texts, comparing texts. So I look at texts from Hikayat Raja Pasai here, from Aceh, and look at the Malabar texts. I cannot again explain. What I did was to compare texts. I cannot again explain. What I did was to compare the Hikayat Raja Pasai with the Qisat Syakarwat Farmat, written in Malabar during that period, and also another very, very important talking about royal conversion to Islam, talking about the Prophet's dream. Be the fact that both talking about the Prophet's dream. Be the fact that both the Malabar story and the Hikayat Raja Pasai share this story, whereby there was the king who abdicated, became a Muslim, turned into a fakir, left the place to convert others to Islam. So I think that's very interesting. And secondly, the king in Malabar region, in the story, in the origin story of the Kisat, was named Cheraman Perumal. Now, in Samudra Pasi, there was a descendant of the Sultan, in fact, the son of Sultan Mahmud, called Sultan Ahmad, and he was named Sultan Ahmad Perumudal Perumal. Now, what about current literature? What is the role of Malabar in current literature? The main proponents of the Malabar school of thought are Arnold, Pineapple, and Morrison. But Morrison argues, all right, that it cannot be Gujarat. There's a school of thought who talk about Gujarat, but Morrison disagrees because he says that Gujarat was only conquered in 1298, whereas, as you know, Samudra Pasi was Islamized earlier. All right, but my question here is, the kingdom of Malabar, all right, was not yet converted around that period as well. In fact, it was a Hindu kingdom, and it was under the Pandya kingdom, which lasted until about 1330s. So, where is that Muslim connection? If you want to further the debate about, Islam coming from this area, let's look at the map. So when you talk about Ma'bri, all right, or Ma'ba, this was a very important term that was mentioned by most Arab geographers. There's a passage here called Ma'ba, which is basically involving the Malabar coast and the Coromandel coast. This whole area from here, Kochi, Kollam, all the way up to this area. So this passage, all by here, what is the connection? Migrated from Southeast Asia, from Samudra Pasi to India, to look at the whole literature of India, and I think this is where you are able to make connection. I think if you are not able to move out of your region, you are not able to make connection. So here, very, very interestingly, even though around that area which I showed just now, it was very much ruled by the Hindu Pandya kingdom, but if you look at the coastal areas here, all these ports were ruled by one family. And who was this family? All right, the name of the Margrave, or what you call the Marzaban, which is a Sassanid title, who controlled the whole port of the Ma'bri region, was named Taqiyuddin. Here, then you have a brother in Kish, in Persia, porters, and these two brothers left Baghdad in 1250, and they traveled, Persian Gulf to South India and then to China. They made their fortune and they came back, and Taqiyuddin stayed in, became Lord of Kish. Trade of pearls, especially, and horses. A little bit more about them. Very interesting. They were not only merchants, but they were also envoys. They were envoys, and they represented the Pandya kingdom. They represented the Ilkhanate, and they also represented the Rasulid dynasty in Yemen. And they were the envoys plying this particular connection from Persia all the way to China. Again, was also called the Malik al-Islam. They were the jurists, they were the judges of that particular area, Malabar, and also in Persia. And very interestingly, it is believed that Fakhruddin, which is the son of Jamal al-Din, who was an envoy to China, was believed to be a saint, and his tomb was seen as a kramat at the Malabar coast. So very interestingly, you have this family, merchants, jurists, and they defy this category. When you say, oh, you have Sufi merchant, you have Sufis, or you have merchants. You have this family who were, Sufis and also merchants and also administrators plus judges. All right. So who were they? Very, very interesting. Scholars debate as to who they were. All right, because of their movement and so on and so forth. Some historians felt that they were Persians, They came from Baghdad, stayed here and all that. Some said, no, they were Arabs, Some said, no, they were from Omani and so on and so forth. But if you look at the genealogy, the sort of the ancestor of this particular family actually came from Medina in Tayyib, and they moved to Wasit, somewhere in between Kufa and Basra in Iraq. All right, but they were making themselves at home in most of these places, in Persian Gulf, in Malabar, in India, and here very much so hybrid. and very much cosmopolitan in terms of their identity and in terms of their movement, local and yet global, in these areas. So very quickly here, there's a lack of time. What is the connection with Samudra Pasi, you ask me? Okay, so we have good, you have Malabar, you have this family and all that. What is the connection? So the connection is this. According to Mukai and Fiashati research, one of the more recent research, Sumatra served as a connecting hub in the diplomatic and commercial network connecting India and UN China in this period. So if you look at the end 3 decades of the 13th century, 1270s, 1290, right up to the first decade, and China. But many people did not see that Sumatra, most probably Samudra Pasi, because Samudra Pasi was a port then, was the center by which you have this diplomatic envoys communicating and connecting, Persia, Samudra Pasi, and also China. So very, very quickly, and the fact that, this kind of relation, this kind of connection was more research in terms of revealing who were these envoys. So it turned out that Jamal al-Din was the envoy to China in 1279, and his son Fakhruddin picked up, succeeded him and became the envoy of the Ilkhanate to the Pandyas and also to UN China. And here, Jamal al-Din died in 1306 and he was buried in Kish, but he was so well known that there was a public prayer meant for him in Baghdad. Taqiyuddin himself, his brother, died in Ma'bar in 1303, and Fakhruddin also died in Ma'bar and buried in Ma'bar together with his uncle. So the question here is that, and what I would like to note is, the TB family remained influential in Ma'bar until 1314, when Delhi Sultanate was conquered, when Delhi Sultanate conquered the Pandya kingdom. So the period of their being envoys very much coincided with this period whereby Samudra Pasi, UN China, Ma'bar, and Persia, Ilkhanate, the Ilkhanate under Ghazan Khan was very much intense. Now, next, after showing that kind of connection, I'll move on to sort of next case study in Aceh and Samudra Pasi century, and we look at Ibnu Battuta in Samudra Pasi and what Ibnu Battuta said about what was happening in Samudra Pasi, which again connects, Samudra Pasi to the northern area, what we know today as India, but it was not India then. And this time round, this connection to Delhi. All right, so from the south, and when Delhi conquered the Malabar area, there's connection with Delhi, and this is where I think very interestingly, when Ibnu Battuta was in Samudra Pasi in 1340 and 1344, he described what was happening in Pasai very similar to what was happening at the Malabar region, because he visited the Madurai Sultanate and he described the horses, the elephants, the processions, very similar to what was happening in Samudra Pasi. Not only that, it seems that these people knew each other. All right, he knew the Shah Bandar and he also knew the Amir who was in Samudra Pasi, and this Amir was also the envoy of the Samudra Pasi Sultan to Delhi. So he was saying that he knew each other, and this jurist, for example, was from Isfahan, this jurist was from Shiraz, and so on and so forth. And he also mentioned that when he was in China and when he returned, back to Samudra Pasi and then back to Malabar and then all the way back to the Red Sea, he said that he was on the ship of Sultan Malik al-Zahir, because Sultan Malik al-Zahir owned this ship. Okay. Time is catching up on me, so let me quickly go on. I think again most of you know about this tomb. All right, I went to Samudra Pasi in February, and I was very much heartened by this group of young Acehnese, Mapesa, Masyarakat Peduli Aceh, who was really saving all these tombs, and all these gravestones and trying to inscribe. So I was with them, and I got to learn a bit more from them. And of course, I think this is what most Acehnese know. There was this tomb of the last Abbasid Caliph here, named Emir Abdullah, and beside him was his son Emir Yusuf, and also Emir Yusuf's wife. All right. So if you look at research on this by Lambourne, by Guilo and Carlus, Carlus was talking about this. Caliph wondered, why would a Caliph Aceh was very much open to international trade, and the reason why Aceh was able to maintain her independence was because the sultanas kept Aceh open in terms of international trade, and the Dutch was not able to really control Aceh because Aceh was balancing these other traders from Bengal, from Gujarat, from other areas, the Muslim networks. She was using the Muslim networks to balance against the Dutch, and the Dutch were complaining that they were not able to monopolize, and that made Aceh sort of open, international, and she made Aceh very attractive for this kind of traders to come in order for Aceh to continue to be an international trading hub by the end of the 17th century. So very quickly, what does the HRP tell us? What do we learn from the HRP? As I've said at the beginning, the origin story of it all. It tells us that there is a very diverse and plural group of people who came and converted Merasilu into Islam. What do the contexts tell us? The historical construction, putting this and that together and trying to understand what was happening in Samudra Pasi. You can see here that in this part of the world, Samudra Pasi and Aceh was key in the Muslim maritime networks and connection between the Middle East, India and China. And I ask the question, we need to think here again, heartland and Muslim periphery. And if you look at this kind of global connection of a family, where then is the center, where then is the periphery? So I think this is something that we can think about, and this can perhaps question, very dominant or very mainstream narratives about Islamic heartland and Islamic periphery, and Southeast Asia is always seen as periphery. Here also another very important point, the important center idea of India, the Indian Empire, China, and you look at the Mughal Empire, you look at the Ottoman Empire, the Safavid Empire. But if you look at the very, very cross-international, you actually see a family, who was really, in a way, controlling the trade, and controlling this kind of diplomatic relations. And here, perhaps we could also question the idea of, Islam came and, we were converted by the Persians or by the Arabs or by who. If you look at this, and they were, forming different identities, very hybrid identities. So I think this can again decenter, shift a bit our thinking about Arabs, Chinese, Indians, India, China, and so on. So because the past at that time was quite a different of states. I think should remember, the fact that it was a center. It was very global. It was already an international center at that particular time, connecting, very, very important Muslim networks. So perhaps we could think about this, and also to think about this cosmopolitan and shared past, and think about making new connections, for Muslim societies, and hopefully this could counter very divisive or very exclusive kind of identity. And I think here, this past, this slice of history about our shared past, about cosmopolitan societies, about local, global mixing, and so on and so forth, the shared past that we have, very important for us perhaps to think from there and to reflect on that, to understand where we are today, and hopefully it is from this shared understanding that we are able to have a vision, of the future. And I think before I end again, I congratulated, we meet and we discuss, and we talk about Aceh's history, Islamic heritage and so on, and where we go from here is a very, very good beginning indeed. So with that, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Thank you very much, Bu Serbanu, for your insightful presentation, I think. But just because we have limited time and we still have next session with other keynote speakers, so we will turn to Dr. Al-Marakabi. I would like to introduce Dr. Al-Marakabi is a lecturer at the Faculty of Islamic Studies, Indonesian International Islamic University. He is an Azharite scholar who pursued his postgraduate studies in the Western academia. He was awarded his PhD in Islamic studies from the University of Edinburgh, and his areas of expertise include Islamic law and modernity, modern Islamic thought, decolonization theory, Islamic history, Muslim-Christian relations, and Islamic theology. But for this, I think Dr. Al-Marghabi will give his speech through recorded media or video, and then he will be online actually, and for the Q&A session. So please, Pak Armaidi. Untuk menghemat waktu, takutnya nanti ada trouble Zoom. Yeah, we will wait for a while, and yeah, after this session we will have yeah, but time is very limited. It's okay. Okay. Yeah. Yeah, maybe we have around 15 minutes for Q&A, so maybe only 2 persons after this, because we still have Prof. Amelia Fauzia and Professor Zulfan Tajuddin and Mahrud Korean. Okay. Assalamualaikum, Dr. Al-Marghabi. Can you hear?
Thank you very much for the opportunity to join you, and I'm really sorry that I couldn't attend in person.
Yeah. So you'll
I'm
present.
just cautious that the internet may not be very stable. That's why I usually prefer the recording
Yeah.
to avoid any case of
Right.
disconnection of the internet.
All right. All right. Yeah. Yeah. But for question and answer question.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Ladies and gentlemen, it's my pleasure to join you in presenting at this conference. Many thanks for the organizing committee for their kind invitation, and I'm terribly sorry that I couldn't attend in person for some reasons. So please let me share with you my PowerPoint for this presentation. So my paper is titled History, Sharia, and Secularity Beyond the Question of Impossible State. This paper explores the varieties of historical implementation of Sharia, seeking to comprehend what Sharia is. For this sake, I draw on some classical literature, especially in Usul al-Fiqh. More particularly, I depend on what's known in Usul al-Fiqh as al-Mas'ud an, which is usually used in contrast to al-Mansus an, in order to understand what Sharia is Sharia a comprehensive system or not, and then I will move later to discuss to what extent this can help us answering uh, the perpetuate contradiction between Islam and modern state. So I will argue that by the virtue of al-Maskud an, which is usually translated as unaddressed zone, some features of the modern state may not be in contradiction with Islamic law, simply because there is nothing in Islamic law that either subverts or endorses some of the modern state structure. It's a question that lies beyond the limit of Islamic law, although not a question of secularity at the same time. So if we will begin by the claim of comprehensiveness of Sharia, so the claim that Sharia is a comprehensive system is widely known and widely argued by almost like all Orientalists, Islamists, modern Islamists, and also in the classical literature of Muslim ulama. So it's usually claimed that there is no space that's not addressed by Sharia. There is no distinct or separate spheres or domains that's not related to Quran and Sunnah. So if we think of the al-Maskud an, how to situate it within the purview and limits of Sharia, how to understand this claim of al-Maskud an or the unaddressed in relationship to the other claim of Shumuliyat Sharia or the comprehensiveness of Sharia. To discuss this issue, I actually try to avoid the categories of religious, secular, cultural, civilizational, and so on, because I think they make the discussion more difficult and irrelevant to be understood. Usually, al-Maskud is defined as the issue that's not covered by holy text. If we go, for example, to the fatwa literature, you will find that some fatwa say very explicitly that the Mufti will say in answering some question that this case is ruled according to the customs of people, not according to Islamic law. This means that there are some issues that's not judged by Islamic law. Sometimes they will say it depends on prevailing customs. This money in some fatwas should be paid by according to the custom of a specific country or community. And this usually referred to as the urf. Urf in this case serves as a discrete sphere of Sharia that's independent of Islamic law. So usually ulama will refer to urf not as something that's part of fiqh that we need to accommodate, but as something that has its own authority, which in this case is the community itself, not the Islamic text. Also, if we refer to the fatwa literature again, we will find something like siyasa. For example, if the decision to register the document of freed slaves, for example, this is something that was proposed by some scholars that there should be a registration of freeing the slaves, or obviously the registration of marriage contract. All of these registrations have nothing to do with Islamic law, so there's no text explicitly that requires marriage contract to be registered or the contract of freeing a slave to be registered. If we refer to some ulama and how they understood this spheres of urf and siyasa, siyasa, for example, we find Zarkashi says in some cases Sharia has no specific ruling regarding them. And then I should highlight this idea of specific ruling because it will be important later to understand the domain of Maskud an. So, for example, he says like Abu Bakr used to give the money or the state remittance to people per capita, while Umar ibn Khattab preferred to give it equally. The Turkish would argue that this is a matter that's not, I mean, like Sharia has no specific ruling. So neither Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu nor Umar radiallahu anhu was mistaken, and they are different, but both of them are considered part of their own reasoning that's not subject to the determinative rulings of fiqh. Independent of Islamic law. It allows the rulers to enact laws about issues that lie outside the sphere of fiqh in pursuit of the public interest of Muslims. So the question now is, how this is different from secularity? I mean, like, if we assume that there's something that's independent of Islamic law, doesn't this mean that Sharia is not a comprehensive system? So Al-Qarafi in Al-Kam, for example, he asked this rhetorical question: how can he say that Allah allowed a person to formulate a ruling over his servants? Shouldn't Allah, the Almighty, alone enact rulings? Qarafi answered that Allah has divided Sharia into 5 prayers, and the other category is what He left general for people to decide. It's not only rulers who can legislate according to Al-Qarafi, but also ordinary people. So, for example, if if I swear that I will fast tomorrow, I mean, in this way, I'm initiating a new ruling. I mean, like, fasting tomorrow is not obligatory, but if I swear to fast tomorrow, I'm initiating a new ruling that's not laid down by text. Yeah, so he says, for example, in the Sharia ruling, by giving an oath to fast each Thursday, an arbitrator between spouses can rule to divorce them if he finds necessary. A husband can ask his wife not to fast outside of Ramadan, and a ruler can make it mandatory to register financial transactions in the notary. All of these issues are regulations that's not laid down by God, by Allah. And at the same time, they are not considered secular. Why? The answer is that because it's authorized by Allah. I mean, the authority to initiate these rulings is delegated by Allah. It's has a specific sphere and limitations. So people can't make regulations that outside the sphere of urf or siyasa. I mean, like, there are some limitations that where people can make this. So I can't make a swear that I will never pray, for example, because this is not the sphere of personal choices. But I can swear that I will not eat apple for the whole of my life, for example. So also that there is a condition that these issues shouldn't contradict Islamic law. It should meet other conditions like public interest, prevailing customs, maqasid sharia, and so on. And more importantly, what makes this non-secular is that once you violate your own regulations that you made yourself, you are not only breaching your swear, but you are violating God's law. Because if you make a swear, this makes that obligatory not only by yourself, but in the eyes of Allah. So if the ruler make a mandatory that to register a marriage contract, so in this case, when you violate the requirement of a marriage registration, you don't only disobey the ruler, but also you violate Allah's rulings, because Allah gave him the authority to do that. And exactly this is the point that doesn't make it secular, doesn't make issues like siyasa, urf, qasam, all of these issues, this exactly what makes it part of the Sharia in a way or another. So I'm proposing here that probably we need to understand that Sharia is a comprehensive system, yes, but not all of the rulings of Sharia is like it's the concept that I coined, positive Sharia and negative Sharia. So positive Sharia is refers to al-mansus an, while negative Sharia refers to the al-maskut an. So drawing on the above discussion, al-maskut an, in contrast to al-mansus alayh, seems to mention as the positive Sharia. However, the other unaddressed issue, we can refer it to as the negative Sharia. So why this category why this categorization is important? Because actually the positive way, or the positive part of Sharia is has different features from the negative part of Sharia. So the positive part of Sharia is usually permanent, universal, based on textual proof, and has more reverence in the eyes of Muslims. While the other negative part is historical, changeable, flexible, and even relative. I mean, like the al-maskut an in Egypt is maybe totally different from al-maskut an in Indonesia. So this is like some mapping that I'm trying to do. So in the green, we will find like al-mansus an. So and then we can find that it can be extended by the methods of qiyas, maqasid, and maslaha to include issues that's not that are not directly mentioned by text. And al-maskut an, on the other hand, will include issues like urf, siyasa, personal choices, and the other, while both of them will remain within the limits of Sharia. Although this, we can call it like negative way of Sharia and positive Sharia and negative Sharia. Definitely, I don't use the word negative in a bad sense. I mean like the absence of a determinative ruling in this case. So the question now is, how can this help us with the debate of incompatibility of Islam and modern state? So let's assume that if we have a part that's not addressed by text and that's left to people to determine it, I think this makes a lot of sense. How many debates about the modern state can be considered, I mean, like compatible with Islam. So let's think, for example, with the debate of legal pluralism and codification. So many scholars would argue, especially people like Wa'il Hallaq and the other people, argue that codification is a totally incompatible with Islam, because historically speaking, there were usually four parties. I mean, like Shafi'i, Hanafi, Maliki, and the Hanbali to decide about different cases, and this kind of legal pluralism was integral part of the Sharia and so on. But if we looked at the history, we will understand that the idea of codification or legal pluralism were considered as part of the maskut an. So there was no like a determinative, monolithic structure that's usually we can refer to as the Islamic one. So in the Abbasid Caliphate, Umayyad and Andalusian dynasty, in pre-modern Morocco, there was only one mazhab. So in the Abbasids, only the Hanafi, the for sure in the Andalus and the Maghreb, it was the Maliki. In the Mamluk era in Sham and Egypt, for example, there was the introduction of the four madhabs. In the Ottoman period, there was the introduction of the continuity of the four madhab with some amendments. So there was some kind of superiority to the Hanafi madhab. Later on in the late Ottoman period, there is another, I mean like restoration of the old Abbasid system of one madhab, which was influenced by the modern codification approach for sure. So we can see that there are a lot of varieties, historically speaking, about the question of codification. If we go like institutionalization, for example, can the Qadi make a decision himself, or there should be some kind of an institutionalization in the decision making? I mean, like again, someone like Halak will suggest that the institutionalization was a hijack of the Qad's functions. But again, if we look at the history, at the authority of the judge, we will find that in the early centuries of Islam, Qadis had the power of fiqh and siyasa. They can enforce hudud, apply ta'zir at the same time. Later on, they have a limited power related to hudud. Ta'zir will usually refer to the other officials. Those officials sometimes were the police chief, hajib. In another time, it was the governor. I mean, like sometimes especially in Moroccan dynasties, there was like expansion of the Qadi authority. So instead of limiting him to ta'zir or hudud or even qada, I mean like functions, he had the authority to collect taxes, lead armies. For example, late Ottoman period, there was like dualism between Qadi and governors. So the authority of the Qadi was limited to the hudud. Later on, there was official institutionalization of some of the ta'zir authorities. So we can see that there are a lot of varieties about the limits of the Qadi authorities. This simply means that neither institutionalization or non-institutionalization were considered as anti-Islamic or non-Islamic. So all of these changes were tolerated by the ulama because there is no standardized system dictating the function of the Qadi or the officials, Sahib al-Shurta, and so on. Tarabosi, for example, concludes that this competence is a relative matter, urfi, which has no standard structure according to شرع. ليس لذلك حد في الشرع. So this variety of systems has not been condemned by the ulama. So the Abbasid didn't say the Umayyad were wrong, or the Mamluk didn't say the Abbasi was wrong when they only implemented the Hanafi madhab. No, there was some kind of considering this as a matter of relative issue that depends on how the ruler sees its public interest of the Muslims. So usually this Islamic law doesn't provide one normative system to be followed in this case. The issue is left to the rulers and to the understanding of what's most suitable and beneficial to Muslims. It's not judicious. They can't claim it to be prohibited as this issue lies outside the limits of this section. So let's consider another example. For instance, so the Hisba of market, Hisbatul Aswaq. So historically speaking, we know that there was some kind of qadis who will go to markets to check that there is no cheating, are accurate, and so on. Usually I ask my students, do you have Hisba of markets in Indonesia? And the answer is no, we don't have Hisba in Indonesia. Actually, Indonesia doesn't, I mean, like in contrast to Aceh for sure. So Indonesia doesn't implement Sharia. But actually, again, the concept of Hisba, I would argue that Hisba of market is found in Indonesia, and it's found in a Muslim country. I mean, like look how the, I don't know, like Ministry of Industry will check that the specification are according to its manual. I mean, like there is no cheating. It's up to the standards of the government. I don't know, up to the standards of the European Union. I mean, this is exactly what Hisba is, but it's how it was made, the structure is just different. But again, this remains so it's similar to the how the authority of the Qadi differs from a place to a place, from a time to a time. So actually also like some of the structures of the Islamic systems like Hisbah differs from time to time. And that's why Ibn Taymiyyah says وأي شيء من الولايات عمل فيه بطاعة الله ورسوله كانت ولاية شرعية. For example, in the time of Juwayni, Imam al-Haramain al-Juwayni, that Sharia is so hudud and ta'zir are so lenient, and actually we need to implement harsher punishments, especially in ta'zir, because people can't be deterred by this kind of ta'zir. Al-Juwayni totally he says وذهب بعض الجهلة عن غرة وغباوة أن ما جرى في صدر الإسلام من التخفيفات كان سببها أنهم كانوا على قرب عهد بصفوة الإسلام وكان يكفي في ردعهم التنبيه اليسير والمقدار القريب من التعذير. So he said like some stupid people claim that ta'zir was so lenient because at the beginning of Islam people were very obedient to Allah, but now we can't implement this kind of ta'zir. That Sharia is actually destroying Sharia. And if this is the case, this means that we can stone the unmarried person who commit fornication. And for Juwayni, this is totally contradict with the Sharia, because Sharia for him, I mean, like the positive Sharia, the al-Mansus an is unchangeable. We can't change the hudud, we can't change the limits of ta'zir. And he will conclude that if we will do that, this will end up to making Sharia relative. Say يقول ثم يختلف ذلك باختلاف directly will destroy Sharia. So the limitations of my typology, or the typology I'm trying to think in a legal centric way. So we still remain thinking from a different perspective. It will be a part of al-Mansus an. So if we look from wara perspective, from ethics perspective, we will find that it's not totally in compliance with Islam. What does this mean? So let's give this example for this example. So on the right hand, you will find what's known as al-Mashrabiyya. So Mashrabiyya is many functions, but one of them is to grant privacy to the people inside the house. So women can look from the Mashrabiyya to the street without people outside and if we look at the left side, we'll find like what's known as the American kitchen. So American kitchen actually doesn't respect this kind of privacy. So like if you have American kitchen in your house, you will discover that the ladies in the house will need to cook before the guests if you have some guests. So neither of the Mashrabiyya is not obligatory. American kitchen, no one can claim that's prohibited, but at the same time, so both of them are part of al-Maskut an, the unaddressed issues. So not there's from a more maqasidi perspective, more ethical perspective, more epistemological and ontological perspective of what Islam is and what the culture of Islam is. Mashrabiyya will appear to be Islamic, and American kitchen will not be Islamic. When I say Islamic, I don't say halal and haram. It's something that's beyond the categorization that we have been discussing so far, the categorization of al-Maskut an and because it's mainly legal categorization. So to conclude this presentation structures of the modern state, some features of the state are not necessarily in contradiction with Islamic law, simply because there is nothing in Islamic law that either subject law, although not a question of secularity. The growing power of the modern state may be partially tolerated as they were placed outside the authority of Islamic law. In a nutshell, this presentation sought to reconsider the claim of the impossible state depending on the classical category of al-Maskut an. So in Wa al-Halaq, in his very provocative and famous book Impossible State, it claims that it's impossible to have a modern and Islamic state at the same time. So for sure, this presentation doesn't dissolve parts of his arguments. Not to claim that modern state is Islamic or anti-Islamic, but to claim that some features actually lies beyond the limits of Islamic law. So I think that's all. Thank you very much, and I'm sorry if I went beyond the time. Jazakallah khair. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Thank you very much, Dr. Mare Begibi, for the insightful presentation, and it aligns with the sub-theme of this conference related to the Sharia law and the implementation in the Muslim world. We still have around 10 minutes, I think, to discuss for question and answer session. So there will be 2 persons. Okay, Pak Baikuni one, and I think woman, please. No? All right, Prof. Amir. Please, Pak Baikuni, be concise and straightforward.
Thank you very much. Terima kasih sudah atas kesempatannya. My question is about Mr. Khan. Thank you for the presentations. It's actually really close to my own research on the multiple energy on Ajami's Sultan of project. So my question would be, most of your findings explore the relation of Muslim networks. I wonder if within the text itself, or the text that you have encountered, you also see a different kinds of other identity, such as like Indic identity. One is more to Sanskrit, like, you know, not only a so-called Muslim. Or, maybe I would choose the word Islamicate for that. Do you see any other kinds of identity in the text other than just Islamic or Islamicate, or maybe like another word that is also famous to call it Persian? Thank you.
I think we can move to the next. Yeah, Pak. Yeah, Prof. Amir. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Professor Khan. It is very interesting research, and it's kind of pioneer research one actually. And I'm just wondering, because you were talking much about the connection of the Samudra Pasi with the coastal Coromandel areas, or Malabar or Makbar, and in the meantime, we know that, well, Ibn Battuta came to Pasai, and he informed us about some Persian elements in that sultanate, and also 2 theologians from Persia, from Shiraz and Isfahan, and they were of course Sunni guys, not Shia, because Shia was not a official religion of the Iran area at the time. It was only after the establishment of Safawiya in 1501 Shia became an official religion or mazhab. My question is that I was wondering how much information that you have which can explain to us the influence in terms of the connection between Persian culture and religion so far with the Pasi, even though we know that some Persian elements also have been found in this area, including also the language itself, Shah Bandar and other things, Nauruz and other things. Then, because we were talking much about the Malabar, coastal Coromandel coast, but not yet much, I think, as far as I listened from you just now about the Persian element in the hybrid connection. But this is very interesting. This is kind of global history. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Prof. Amirul Hadi and Dr. Baikuni. And yeah, please, Professor Serbanu, respond to the two questions.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you very much for the two very interesting questions. Yeah. For the first question, yes, there were other, for example, cultures that were mentioned in the Hikayat Raja Pasai, and there were a lot of sort of Indic, South Indian, which was different from the Muslim sort of culture, you know, that they were talking about in terms of the genealogy. So there were a lot of South or Tamil elements there in terms of the magicians, the yogic, you know, culture, and also some Sanskrit words as well. And I think quite a lot of researchers have looked into this kind of influences in the hikayats, especially in the Malay hikayats. So it was a very, like I was trying to show, not only very cosmopolitan, but also a very multi-layered, very diverse, and also hybrid world. There were a lot of this kind of interconnections. The borders were not defined, you know, the borders were, I think, much more of intercultural and cross-cultural kind of connections and relations. Yeah, and I think that is quite a characteristic of quite a number of the hikayats. Yeah. And thank you for your question, Prof. Amirul Hadi. Yes, I think very much so. I mean, there are a lot of scholars who have also looked at Persian influences in terms of Persian language, poetry, you know, and also stories, Persian stories that have been translated. But what I was trying to show in this research is to really mean by Persian, you know, what do you understand, besides talking about language, when you talk about identity, for example. So this particular TB family, which I was following and trying to trace connections, you know, because they were really a global family, you know, with global connections. So this is where, when you talk about different identities, when you talk about different cultures, what I was trying to show is that it defies sort of the idea of the Persianate world, you know, or Arab. So it is much more of encounters, is much more of a cross-cultural encounters, where the idea of Persian, the idea of Arab, and the idea of Indian, you know, did mix in terms of the different kind of sort of hybrid identities, you know, that there's very much reflected in the Al-TB family. So here, what I would like to try to show is not so much the categorizations. There are all this, and there's a lot of literature looking at all these categorizations. What I'm trying to show is to try and sort of, you know, make it a bit more porous. You know, it's a much more of a mix, for example. It's much more of a shared history rather than this kind of categories. So what are some of the possibilities, and what are some of the things that defy these categories? Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Prof. Serbanu, for the answers and responses. Yeah, we have again, we have a limited time for this session, and we will continue to the next session. But to wrap up for some important notes from the two speakers, I would like to highlight yang pertama, ini biar juga bisa menjadi pemahaman kita bersama ya. Prof. Serbanu tadi sudah banyak menjelaskan, meskipun dengan waktu yang sangat terbatas ya. Tetapi ada satu kata kunci yang juga penting untuk kita pahami, bahwa beliau mengingatkan Aceh merupakan pusat peradaban di masa lalu yang begitu luar biasa. Tadi sudah ditunjukkan dari beberapa bukti sejarah ya, bahwa Aceh merupakan pusat internasional, global, sehingga peradaban-peradaban itu semestinya menjadi pelajaran penting untuk kita bersama, bukan hanya untuk kehidupan kita sekarang, tapi bagaimana mewujudkan Aceh di masa mendatang. Saya kira itu pesan penting yang juga menjadi highlight dan penting untuk kita bagi masyarakat Aceh untuk memahami itu. Adapun yang kedua, tadi Dr. Al-Marakebi juga sudah menjelaskan bagaimana isu-isu terkait dengan hukum Islam ya, terutama sekali tentang huruf ya. Ini juga menjadi isu yang masih menarik untuk di laptop.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. Yeah. Before closing, I would like to invite Dr. Arfiansah to come forward, and Prof. Amelia Fauzia, Prof. Zulfan Tajuddin, and Dr. Mahmud Kuria online will be joining online. So I would like to also apologize if you find some mistakes or shortcomings from this session, and I close this session with Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam.
So I'm really sorry for this. Pak Arfiansah kan bisa dipanggil. Ya, we will have time before zuhur ya, and we will also have lunch. Kita akan ada makan siang Bu ya, disediakan ya. Ada makan siang. Jadi sesi yang berikutnya ini ada beberapa pembicara penting ya yang hadir. Prof. Amelia Fauzia bukan juga yang pertama kita undang, sebelumnya juga pernah ya, termasuk Prof. Oman. Selamat datang Kang Oman ya. Sebelumnya dulu juga kita undang untuk hadir menjadi pembicara kita, dan beliau adalah yang sangat membantu ya di Islam Futura, jurnal pasca sarjana nih Bu Eka, termasuk yang di backup oleh Prof. Oman selama ini. Pak Arfian? Oh, ke toilet. Silakan Bu Amelia. Sekali lagi terima kasih Bu Serbanu. Thank you very much. Reprise. Ya. Sekedar informasi bagi yang baru berkunjung pertama kali ke Pasca Sarjana ya, mungkin ada yang kurang tahu lokasi di sini ya. Jadi kalau untuk ke toilet kita punya 2 tempat ya. Bapak Ibu bisa ke belakang, keluar dari sini langsung ke belakang sana, itu ada 1 tempat, artinya untuk laki-laki dan perempuan. Kemudian di bawah, jadi kalau di atas nanti penuh bisa ke bawah ya. Ada lantai 2 dan di lantai 1 juga ada. Pak Arfian, please. The time is yours, brother. Silakan. Sorry ya, termakan waktu ya.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. I would like to welcome you again to this conference. I think the third Iconic and ICAIOS conference, and it was fascinating that we start the conference from very far away to the past, to the 12th century, and in this panel we will go through 17th century, start from 17th century to the first 20th century situation. Kita akan ada 3 orang pembicara. Pertama Pak Tajudin di sini. Silakan Pak. Kemudian ada Pro Amelia Fazia dari UIN Jakarta, dan satu lagi dia lagi berjalan ke kampus Leiden. Dia sekarang ada di Leiden, Belanda, dan akan mempresentasikan penelitiannya online dari Leiden. Sangat menarik sebenarnya melihat background para pembicara di sini, dan seluruh panel ini mempunyai koneksi ke Belanda. Prof. Tajudin pernah di Rotterdam, S2 di Institut Social Science ya, Social Studies. Kami biasa manggilnya Pak Tajudin karena sudah sangat familiar dengan Pak Tajudin. ICAIOS pernah membawa program juga, program Colombo, membawa mahasiswa dari Australia ke sini, dan saat ini dia terbang dari Australia ke Aceh langsung, dan akan mempresentasikan penelitiannya tentang pilkada, pemilihan, suasana politik di Indonesia dan Filipina. Dan kemudian Prof. Amelia dari UIN Syarif Hidayatullah, dan juga masternya di Leiden. Jadi punya koneksi ke Leiden, dan saya juga sendiri pernah di Leiden. Dan pembicara beliau sejarawan, profesor bidang sejarah dan peradaban Islam. Kemudian S3 di Australia dan postdoc tentang filantropis di NUS ya Prof ya. Ya, dan juga bagian integral dari ICAIOS saat ini. Dan pembicara kita, the third presenter, Mahmud Kuria, S2 S3 di Belanda, dan secara sejarah sebenarnya buah tumis Aceh, dan dia langsung teringat kepada masakan ibunya, dan dia orang Malabar. Prof. Kami diskusi tentang sejarah bagaimana Islam dari seperti presentasi Prof. Khan tadi, bagaimana Islam masuk ke Aceh, menyebar ke seluruh dunia. Dan definitely Mahmud Kuria was on his way to university. So I expected him to be the first speaker, so we can keep the order of the panel from previous one to the second. And unfortunately, he's on his way, so therefore I would like to invite Prof. Amelia Fazia. Prof. Tajudin dulu. Because it is a bit of sejarah politik ya Prof ya, Ratu Adil. Dan setelahnya baru kita diskusi tentang pemilihan Raja Adil di Indonesia dan di Filipina. Bagaimana sih prosesnya begitu. So please welcome Prof. Amelia.
Bisa minta tolong ini untuk tampilin? Oh itu. Sini.
Ada koneksinya Prof.
Iya ya bisa. Itunya kan. Nah. Ini udah. Oke. Somebody. Oh iya, oke, silakan. Oh ya sudah, jadi nggak perlu ini ya. Oke, nggak perlu. Baik, terima kasih. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Alhamdulillah wa syukurillah wa la haula wa la quwata illa billah ma ba'd. It is an honor for me to sit here in front of distinguished speakers dan Bapak Ibu sekalian, honorable keynote speakers, some are my guru, Prof. Amirul, Prof. Syarbanu, Prof. Oman, Mike also, Pak Marik, and Prof. Mehmet Ozai, Fahmi, and etc., including Prof. Tajuddin. In this opportunity, I'm very happy to speak here. Could you please make the presentation? Okay. I'm thanking Professor Eka for inviting me here and to think about the theme of this conference, Islamic History and Heritage, Remembering the Past, Remaking the Future. I'm also happy in this iconic conference and also ICAIOS conference. I'm proud to be part of ICAIOS from few years ago with Pak Marik and others. Saya bahasa Inggris saja atau bahasa Aceh? Aduh, saya harus belajar dulu sama Prof. Amirul. Mungkin saya akan campur-campur ya, campur-campur. Ketika memikirkan tentang tema ini, Islamic History and Heritage, Remembering the Past, Remaking the Future, this is quite the excited theme for me as a historian. Tentu saja ini tema yang sangat menarik, sangat klik buat saya sebagai sejarawan. Karena bagi sejarawan, belajar sejarah, learning history is the past history is for the future. Jadi belajar sejarah itu untuk masa kini dan masa depan. Jadi this is very great topic tema for me. While I'm trying to find out what should I present to you, saya waktu itu sedang kira-kira berpikir apa yang akan saya presentasikan, karena mostly I write in the last few years, 10 years, 12 years about philanthropy. I'm not sure, I think it is very the topic that you might already know a lot, but I'm challenging myself to go back to the history of Ratu Adil, the Just King, yang dulu pernah saya pelajari waktu master degree di Leiden, tadi disebutkan oleh Pak Arya, di Leiden University. Awalnya ketika sering mendengar berita, kalau di Jakarta tuh macet ya, jadi ketika macet kan dengar radio, kemudian banyak berita-berita tentang kandidat-kandidat tahun depan ya, 2024. Kemudian yang saya amati itu ada upaya-upaya untuk membawa kandidat ya, kelompoknya masing-masing, kandidat yang dipercayai oleh masyarakat untuk bisa bagaimana kandidat ini bisa maju. Termasuk apakah itu calon presiden, wakil presiden, termasuk ada yang baru-baru ini kita dengar misalnya mencoba mengubah ke Mahkamah Konstitusi aturan terkait usia misalnya. Buat saya ini menarik as historian. Saya berpikir-pikir ini fenomena yang sebenarnya dalam sekali. Jadi saya kembali ke tesis saya tentang Ratu Adil, Just King, Ratu Adil, Imam Mahdi sebagai kira-kira awaited ruler ya. Jadi pemimpin yang ditunggu-tunggu, pemimpin adil yang tunggu-tunggu yang akan membebaskan kita semua dari ketidakadilan dan membawa kita ke zaman kesejahteraan, kira-kira kayak gitu mitosnya. Nah, kemudian saya melihat bahwa ternyata dalam sejarah Ratu Adil, sejarah Jasking atau Mahdism ini, gerakan Mahdism, itu ada upaya untuk menggunakan masa lalu, ya, menggunakan masa lalu, legenda, mitos, dan kemudian upaya voluntarisme, mencoba menjadikan tokoh yang diidamkannya itu menjadi pemimpin. Nah, itu yang saya lihat dari fenomena ini. Jadi, to me, the concept of Jasking is not merely a hope. Ini bukan sekedar harapan konsep Ratu Adil ini, but rather a proactive approach the people take to influence their fate actively. Jadi masyarakat, bukan hanya elit ya, tapi masyarakat biasa itu berusaha untuk mencoba mengubah masa depan, kira-kira gitu. Jadi masyarakat, society tries to create its leaders by using the past history, legend, and actively doing voluntarism. Nah, ini akan saya ceritakan. Selanjutnya, saya yakin sebenarnya istilah-istilah tentang messianic figures, Ratu Adil, Imam Mahdi itu sesuatu yang sering didengar oleh Bapak Ibu rekan-rekan sekalian. Sejarah kita, our history, itu sangat dipenuhi dengan cerita-cerita tentang protes movement, social movement, gerakan-gerakan sosial, gerakan protes yang sangat rampan, yang sangat banyak, tidak mesti yang besar-besar ya, tapi yang kecil-kecil itu di abad 19 dan abad 20. Nah, salah satu tipologinya adalah yang kita sebut gerakan Ratu Adil atau Jasking gitu. Tentu saja dalam Muslim, dalam Islam, konsep Ratu Adil, Imam Mahdi ini cukup dekat ya. Jadi ada konsep mesianisme dan milenarisme yang itu sudah ada dalam ajaran eskatologi konsep dari Islam. Nah, yang sering kita dengar adalah figur Ratu Adil yang merujuk kepada ramalan Jayabaya, the prophecies of Jayabaya. Jayabaya ini sebenarnya abadnya abad 12, raja ini di Kediri abad 12. Tapi sebenarnya ramalan ini baru muncul starting from 17th century. Jadi baru abad 17 ramalan-ramalan ini muncul dan masif abad 18 dan 19. Jadi lagi-lagi ada dibentuk, di-create ya. Nah, yang saya lihat bahwa yang sebelumnya saya pelajari, saya tulis di master thesis saya, bahwa political elites, elit-elit politik itu mereka mencoba mengambil manfaat dari ramalan-ramalan ini untuk mendapat popularitas dari dukungan dari rakyatnya, kira-kira seperti itu. Tapi kali ini saya challenging myself untuk sebenarnya tidak hanya elit saja, tapi ordinary people, masyarakat itu juga sebenarnya memiliki, berkontribusi terhadap pembuatan, menciptakan pemimpin-pemimpin ini. Nah, kalau dilihat dari kasus-kasus yang ada di slide di bawahnya itu, kasus-kasus ini banyak sekali. Ini hanya sedikit saja yang saya taruh ya. It's only very limited cases. Kalau lihat buku sejarah apalagi yang abad 19, 20 nih, kalau dekan sejarah nih Pak Agam ya, dekan sejarah pasti hafal betul nih Pak Dekan. Dekan Fakultas Adab maksud saya. Ini banyak sekali kasus-kasus ini yang kebetulan agak familiar dengan saya sebut. Nah, yang banyaknya adalah dari 1800-an. 1800, 1810, 14, 15 dan seterusnya. Dan yang cukup besar itu tentu saja mitos tentang Ratu Adil ini digunakan oleh oleh Pangeran Diponegoro. Ini Diponegoro yang kedua ya, sebelumnya juga ada Pangeran Diponegoro yang kemudian menjadi disebut Perang Jawa. Mitos ini digunakan sangat masif dan akhirnya tersebar luas terutama di Jawa, dan di masa-masa setelahnya termasuk sampai abad 20 awal kemerdekaan, mitos ini tetap berkembang dan digunakan. Jadi there has been a use, jadi ada penggunaan mitos, tapi juga ada produksi. Jadi bukan saja digunakan masyarakat, tapi masyarakat memproduksi mitos ini dan direproduksi. Jadi mitosnya itu kalau dilihat di manuskrip ya, itu ada perbedaan, ada modifikasi-modifikasi yang sangat kreatif. Jadi production sama reproduction of prophecies of Jayabaya ini, dan juga tentang Imam Mahdi. Tentu saja kita tahu tentang Imam Mahdi ini, figur ini dari hadis ya, dari hadis yang berkembang. Dan saya kira kalau Bapak Ibu suka mendengar pengajian atau ceramah, ada para ulama, ustadz yang sering kali menyebut tokoh Imam Mahdi ini. Tentang Ratu Adil, Imam Mahdi yang kemudian dia menjadi gerakan dan mitos ini kemudian cukup masif itu selama proses Islamisasi. Jadi saya waktu itu argue kepada Profesor Sartono Kartodirjo yang melihat ini sangat Hinduistik konsep, tapi saya melihat bahwa ini ada transisi dan sebenarnya lebih banyak didukung oleh konsep Imam Mahdi dan konsep Ratu Adilnya itu, Ratu Adil yang ini bahasa di naskahnya itu Heru Cokro. Jadi istilahnya Heru Cokro. Dan intinya sebenarnya mudah kenapa konsep ini bisa masif, karena tokoh Jayabaya atau Ratu Adil ini sangat tepat karena dianggap tokoh yang bisa membawa masyarakat yang hidup dalam suasana kemiskinan, pajak yang tinggi, ketidakadilan, apalagi waktu itu di bawah penjajahan Belanda, menjadi pemimpin yang bisa membawa kepada masa yang lebih baik. Nah, sedikit saja tentang, saya melihat bahwa ini karena bahasanya tentang bagaimana menggunakan masa lalu ya. Next slide. Jadi bagaimana ada collective memories. Memang saya menggunakan collective memories ini agak beda dengan beberapa yang digunakan oleh sejarawan. Tapi saya melihat bahwa reproduksi Jayabaya, tokoh Jayabaya, reproduksi ramalannya itu sendiri itu menjadi, Jayabaya itu menjadi kolektif memoris masyarakat dan diproduksi oleh masyarakat, disesuaikan dengan konteksnya masing-masing. Jadi itu yang saya lihat, jadi bagaimana ada penggunaan kolektif memori untuk mendukung messianic figur tokoh yang diidam-idamkan ini untuk kemudian digunakan untuk gerakan, apakah itu gerakan protes sosial atau gerakan untuk memunculkan pemimpin. Kemudian ini ada istilah yang nantinya nih saya menghubungkan dengan masa kini, istilah yang sampai sekarang itu sering dipakai adalah Satrio Piningit atau Heru Cokro. Jadi sebagai sebuah pangeran atau raja atau pemimpin yang dia awalnya tidak kelihatan tapi kemudian bisa muncul. Saya agak cepat saja dan next slide. Nah, bagaimana sih masyarakat menggunakan profesis itu, ramalan-ramalan itu? Di next slide. Ya. Ada dua kasus yang saya detail mempelajari, membaca, yaitu cerita ini agak kebalik nulisnya. Cerita tentang Isa sebenarnya, tapi karena dia orang Banyumas itu saya Ngisa, sama Jumadil Kubro dan Kiai Sirat dan Mas Hadi. Jadi menarik bagaimana sebenarnya ramalannya itu tidak selalu tepat dengan tokoh yang ada. Tapi dalam dua movement ini, Isa ini dan Kiai Sirat itu adalah kayak tokoh figur keagamaan, figur agama yang kemudian dengan kreatif bisa menciptakan Jumadil Kubro dan Mas Hadi sebagai the Ratu Adil, the Awaited One, Imam Mahdi, kira-kira kayak gitu. Sampai masyarakat itu misalnya, oh iya dulu waktu kelahirannya ada cahaya yang turun misalnya. Oh benar, karena dia waktu mudanya seperti ini tanda-tanda Imam Mahdi, ini tanda-tanda Ratu Adil. Jadi bagaimana masyarakat didorong untuk untuk membuat figur itu sama dengan tokoh Ratu Adil ya. Nah, begitu juga dengan syarikat Islam yang kita sering baca, syarikat Islam di awal abad ke-20, bagaimana organisasi ini bisa masif tersebar, diterima terutama di Jawa waktu itu, Pulau Jawa, itu banyak menggunakan konsep-konsep Ratu Adil dan Imam Mahdi, terutama Ratu Adil. Bahkan pemimpinnya Hos Cokro Aminoto itu udah dianggap oleh sebagian masyarakat sebagai Ratu Adil. Jadi, oh ya ini pemimpin yang dijanjikan akan datang. Oh, organisasi yang harus kita dukung. Jadi menurut saya itu menarik dan cara-caranya sangat menyesuaikan dengan dan akhirnya membuat ramalan-ramalan baru. Nah, ada poin penting dari sini adalah dalam gerakan Ratu Adil, konsep ini selalu ada charismatic leaders, selalu ada pemimpin yang karismatik yang memimpin gerakan-gerakan ini. Gerakan yang saya maksud tidak melulu big movement ya, tidak melulu kayak perang di Ponorogo yang bertahun-tahun berapa banyak pasukan, tapi kadang gerakan-gerakan yang cuma kecil, ada orang yang percaya oh ini Ratu Adil, kemudian tiba-tiba dia bawa tombak menyerang kantor Belanda misalnya. Jadi tidak melulu yang besar-besar. Nah, Nah, yang poin kedua selain charismatic leader, saya melihat ini karena studi saya sekarang ini banyak tentang filantropi, tentang zakat, sedekah, kedermawanan Islam. Ini ternyata itu ada faktor voluntarisme. Kalau bahasa kita sekarang, voluntarisme yang sebenarnya support oleh masyarakat, dilakukan oleh masyarakat pendukung gerakan-gerakan ini. Kalau bahasa kerennya sekarang voluntarisme atau relawan ya. Kita tahu para calon-calon ini juga punya kelompok-kelompok yang punya relawan-relawan, calon presiden ya misalnya. Jadi volunteering times, giving donation, sedekah itu luar biasa. Itu tidak ada semacam paksaan, lebih banyak adalah ini voluntarily. Dan akhirnya mereka menjadi followers dari gerakan-gerakan Ratu Adil ini. Jadi saya melihat bahwa dalam gerakan Ratu Adil, dalam konsep Ratu Adil itu ada voluntarisme yang kuat yang membuat ini bisa menjadi gerakan yang besar dan memperkuat civil society. Nah, yang slide selanjutnya ini sekedar gambaran saja tentang yang masa kini seperti apa. Ini saya merefleksi yang ke masa kini. Jadi bagaimana penggunaan konsep Ratu Adil ini, Just King ini, kalau sekarang, ini kalau tadi saya bicara yang abad 19 ya 20, itu lebih banyak diciptakan oleh pemimpin dan kemudian masyarakat mendukung dan menciptakan. Tapi yang sekarang itu lebih banyak diciptakan oleh masyarakatnya, oleh relawannya, kira-kira kayak gitu. Jadi mostly created by followers, dan yang unik kalau dulu masa kolonial gitu, orang lebih banyak ada social movementnya, protes, perang, kira-kira gitu, perang sabil dan seterusnya. Nah, kalau masa sekarang ini mengikuti democratic mechanism gitu. Jadi saya lihat tuh ada semacam transformasi, dan sekarang kasusnya tidak besar lagi. Mungkin kalau kita merujuk ke Kunto Wijoyo yang bilang kalau sejarah masa lampau yang penuh dengan mitos itu masa mitos gitu ya. Ratu Adil itu adalah menunjukkan periode masa lalu. Nah, kalau yang masa sekarang abad 20 dan seterusnya itu dianggap periode modern yang akhirnya mitosnya menjadi berkurang. Tapi kita bisa lihat misalnya, ini saya ambil, ini screenshot ya dari media-media. Bisa dibayangkan bagaimana sebenarnya mitos atau legenda masa lalu itu masih digunakan, masih menjadi kolektif memori masyarakat untuk kemudian mengunggulkan calon-calon yang diyakini. Misalnya ini ada Anies Baswedan, ini KBA News, KBA atau Kantor Berita Anies Baswedan. Jadi menarik menurut saya. Ini jelas sekali bilang Anies Baswedan itu Satrio Piningit, ya kan. Kemudian di sebelahnya ini yang sudah lama ya, tentang Jokowi yang dipercaya juga. Ini saya kira cukup masif tahun 2014, 2019. Dan kemudian ada siapa nih, relawan Puan dan seterusnya. Jadi ini banyak, dan ini adanya di wilayah masyarakat yang bawah gitu, masyarakat yang bawah yang mereka ingin figur-figur pemimpinnya itu maju, dan akhirnya mereka membentuk relawan-relawan dan supporting calonnya untuk maju. Singkat saja, saya tahu waktunya udah tipis. Next slide selanjutnya. Saya melihat kalau berkaca dari peristiwa tahun abad 19 dan 20, kasus-kasus Ratu Adil itu ada yang berhasil menciptakan pemimpin, ada yang tidak, apalagi gagal sudah ditangkap oleh pemerintah Belanda gitu kan. Nah itu kira-kira ada tiga poin ya yang membuat berhasil atau gagal gitu di ide gerakan Ratu Adil ini. Yang pertama itu socio-political context. Jadi ketika ada konteks politik yang menunjukkan ketidakadilan, nah ini kata kunci yang penting, ketidakadilan itu sangat kuat, maka ide, pemikiran, gerakan ini bisa menjadi kuat di satu tempat. Walaupun kadang beda ya, ini satu daerah misalnya di Banyumas yang di desa ini muncul, di sini enggak. Karena ada teorinya ada relative deprivation, jadi ada satu masyarakat yang merasa tertindas tapi yang desa sebelahnya tidak merasa tertindas. Nah, jadi tergantung socio-political context. Yang kedua adalah personal modalities. Ada tentu saja tokohnya itu yang bisa dalam tanda kutip didukung, dijual, yang potensial untuk jadikan pemimpin. Apakah misalnya dia keturunan siapa, dia dari keluarga besar mana atau etik mana gitu. Dan yang terakhir itu momentum. Momentum yang paling besar salah satunya adalah pergantian masa. Jadi milenium. Biasanya di setiap pergantian milenium itu masyarakat mulai mencari-cari, dan itu menjadi salah satu faktor yang mendukung satu gerakan idenya itu bisa berhasil atau enggak. Kita bisa lihat misalnya di Pangeran Diponegoro, Soekarno dan seterusnya. Dan terakhir saya ingin menyampaikan di slide terakhir, berkaca dari kasus-kasus Ratu Adil yang ada, bagaimana gerakan ya atau konsep Ratu Adil yang sekarang kontemporer ini di masyarakat seperti apa. Saya mengutip Sartono Kartodirjo dalam ungkapan filsafat sejarah yang dia bilang adalah, Ratu Adil is a concrete messianic expectation in which people attempted to make their expectation come true. Jadi ini sebenarnya harapan yang oleh masyarakat itu dikonkretkan ya. Jadi sebuah harapan yang konkret yang bagaimana masyarakat itu berupaya menjadikan harapan ini benar-benar terjadi. Nah, saya melihat bahwa penggunaan konsep Ratu Adil ini, the use of the past, jadi penggunaan masa lalu, kemudian bagaimana kolektif memori itu mendukung penggunaan konsep Ratu Adil ini menjadi tools yang penting untuk menciptakan masa depan ya, masa depan. Nah, saya sebenarnya bertanya-tanya ketika diundang ke sini ke Aceh, karena konsep ini sangat kuat di Jawa, tapi saya lihat di beberapa budaya di Indonesia itu punya konsep-konsep seperti ini. Ada Batara di mana di Kalimantan, Sulawesi, dan juga saya mencari-cari. Ada tulisan yang menyinggung, tapi yang menulis itu Ustadz ya, tentang Daud Bereh gitu ya. Daud Bereh, saya tertarik sekali apa benar dia menggunakan konsep Imam Mahdi dan seterusnya, dan dihubungkan dengan DITII ya. Tapi sayangnya saya tidak punya further data tentang itu, dan mungkin terlalu jauh ini karena yang bicara Ustadz. Tapi kalau ada yang Bapak Ibu rekan-rekan yang punya clue ke sana, ini membuat saya akan menarik bagaimana konsep ini juga ada di kultur di Aceh, terutama yang Imam Mahdism ini. Nah, yang terakhir saya melihat bahwa ada transformasi, ada perubahan dari yang konsep Ratu Adil yang sangat revolutionary kira-kira gitu, perang dengan senjata, protest movement, kepada yang sekarang yang lebih dalam tanda kutip demokratik, itu terjadi. Dan dan yang terakhir saya sekali lagi bilang bahwa ini adalah fenomena kecil yang saya lihat bahwa sebenarnya tidak saja elit-elit penguasa yang mereka itu bisa menciptakan pemimpin masa depan, tapi juga masyarakat biasa itu juga cukup aktif untuk melakukannya melalui penggunaan sejarah masa lalu, legenda, dan upaya-upaya volunteerisme serta kolektif memori, yang salah satu contohnya melalui mitos Ratu Adil ini. Saya cukupkan di situ. Terima kasih. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Ya, menarik sekali ya tentang konsep Ratu Adil. Di Aceh juga ada. Kita selalu membayangkan tentang Iskandar Muda dan sebagainya, dan tokoh-tokoh ulama yang lain. Dan dari masa lalu, mari kita berpindah bagaimana mencari Ratu Adil di dunia modern dan apa yang terjadi. Akan dipresentasikan oleh Prof. Julfan Tajuddin. Beliau adalah profesor di Western Sydney University dan akan mempresentasikan tentang komparatif analisis tentang pemilihan di Indonesia dan Filipina. Pada Prof, saya persilakan.
Terima kasih Pak Arfian. Terlebih dahulu, Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Terlebih dahulu terima kasih kepada Win Araniri setelah mengundang saya ke sini. It is good to be back in Aceh. I was here probably every month in the 2006 up to early 2007. I was with UNDP, and I had something to do in Aceh. I remember that I traveled to deep south to inland Aceh Tengah with 2 UN cars with satellite phone, and we have to leave the village before dark. I remember those days, and Aceh now is a lot different. And then I was invited by ICAIOS to give training on conflict and development back in 2011, 12 years ago. And then just before COVID, I had the chance to lead the student trip to Aceh again, and hosted by ICAIOS. Now it is good to be back here. Slide saya bisa ditampilkan, Pak? Mana nih? Apa? Udah saya kirim tadi ke Pak Zulfikar. Oke, ya. Oke. Actually, I was struggling to find the relevance of my presentations with the theme of this conference. And then, while listening to Professor Amelia, I think I can make the relevance, significant relevance, remembering the past, remaking the future. what I'm going to say is exactly this. We look at the past, but not so distant past, just a little bit of the past about the record of electoral violence in Indonesia and Philippines. And then I will conclude with saying what needs to be taken seriously for Indonesian is in looking at the future. On this, Philippines is not a good guide for Indonesia. The road not to follow. That's the remaking future. So how I arrive at that conclusions, I'll move to the next slide. Okay, comparing Indonesia and Philippines, this is actually, I haven't done anything on this one. This is my new endeavor. After spending quite some time on conflict and development, and then on employment, and then in the middle age, every academic, I think, will have to struggle to find new toy. We can be occupied doing something, spending time, travel. We need new things to keep the spirit. Otherwise, we'll be dead as an academic. I think Mehmet agree with me. So before I spent a semester sabbatical early this year, I developed this kind of proposal for me to be away from the university for one semester. And then this is something new that I'm trying to do, political economy of comparative development, comparing Indonesia and Philippines. And a lot of similarities between Indonesia and Philippines. I spent 2 weeks as my first trip to Philippines to see Philippines in the real sense, to step my foot there, to breathe the air, talk to people, and then eat the food. Really similar. A lot of similarity between Indonesia and the Philippines. The only difference is, when you walk here, you hear azan everywhere, you see masjid and surau, musalla, but in Philippines, you hear, you see church. That's the only difference. The feeling, the atmosphere, when you talk to people, you eat the food, everything is the same. When you see the berantakan, ya, kan kita berantakan di Indonesia, ya Filipina juga berantakan. Kalau kita ke Malaysia kan kita merasa oh ini negara ini naik kelas, they are ahead of us. Not to say Singapore. You go to Bangkok to see Thailand, oh they are already ahead of us. But to look at Philippines, it's just like us. And no one will look at me thinking that I'm foreigner in Manila. Everyone will say that I'm local. So that's my first impressions with the Philippines. So this is the 2 largest countries in Southeast Asia. The same with Indonesia, very diverse, archipelagic, with dominant religious majority, Muslim in context of Indonesia, Catholic in Philippines. And then if you look at the socio-economic standard, more or less similar. In the past, Philippines was the good hope. When we look at the record in the 50s, when we opened probably the most important development book about Asia, written by the Nobel Prize winner called Gunnar Myrdal, he wrote a Bible on the problems of development in Asia called Asian Drama. And Asian Drama says that Indonesia is a basket case with India. No hope. But when he assessed Philippines, this is the hope. But what you see later, Philippines was said to be the sick man of Asia, like Turkey as the sick man in Europe. There was a period, but of course, everyone will try to rekindle that kind of story. So that's the basic idea of this plan. I don't know how this plan will end up, but it is good to start a plan. Yeah? And then we look at a small sections of the big project, which is comparing the electoral violence in the contemporary democracy of Philippines and Indonesia. If you look at the past, Indonesia only becoming a new democracy only in 1998 after the fall of Suharto, Philippines becoming new democracy again only in 1986 after the departure of Marcos. So only 12 years gap. But what we can see is, we see similar trend of, not trend, we find electoral violence in the Philippines. We can also find electoral violence in Indonesia. But the similarity is, next slide please. The similarity is, in Philippines and Indonesia, they are local. The domain is local, not national. That's the first key point. In Indonesia, we started to recognize electoral violence in the context of kerusuhan pilkada. It was after the introductions of direct local elections of the head of districts, bupati, wali kota, or the governor, the head of province. So that's in Indonesia. To a large extent, if you look at the national parliamentary elections or presidential elections in contemporary Indonesia, to a large extent, a lot more peaceful. But in Pilkada, you will see, including in Aceh. In the Philippines, the electoral violence at the local level is attached to the competitions between local strongmen. They call the political dynasties. John Siddell called that one as bossism, the local strongman bosses at the local level. So this is a very entrenched local strongman who control the bureaucracy, control the local politics, and also control the local economic resources. And that kind of situation runs for generations. Think of President Duterte. He was the mayor of Davao City for how many decades? Then he became the president. Then he was replaced by his daughter. And his daughter becoming vice president once Duterte stepped in. And who replaced Duterte's daughter as the mayor of Davao City? His son. You will find in many of the Philippines localities, you look at the origins of Marcos in the north, you look at the original basis of Joseph Estrada. I was surprised to learn that one while reading that one in my dormitory room in the Ateneo University Manila campus in Quezon City. So it's fascinating to understand that kind of thing. So that's, and also the local the electoral violence in the Philippines, that will be more likely when the contestations of competing families, yeah, or clan or dynasty at the local level, when the balance is quite there. When one family dominates, no serious challenger, things will be all right. But when serious challenger came in, then you will see that one. Kerusuhan pilkada di Indonesia is in the forms of AMO, run AMO. Bisa diingatkan saya istilah itu. Sakitnya tega. Nah mungkin itu sehingga orang pun untuk mencapai tujuannya, untuk melakukan kekerasannya, dia nggak menyamarkan itu menjadi kerusuhan massa. Nah sebenarnya model seperti ini mengakar di Indonesia. Sehingga jangan salah, kata-kata AMO, run AMO itu adalah kosakata bahasa Inggris yang diadopsi dari budaya Indonesia dan Malaysia, Malay word. Nah, itu berbeda dengan kultur political assassinations yang secara merata terjadi di Filipina. Nah, itu model yang berbeda dari electoral violence at the local level, riots kerusuhan di Indonesia, dan political killings in the context of Filipina. Jadi, mengakar di konteks historis. Kemudian, hal ini bisa kita lihat dalam gambar yang lebih besar, selanjutnya, slide selanjutnya, bahwa ini adalah electoral violence. Ini dalam konteks demokrasi yang lebih luas, ini sebenarnya kan proses yang akan melemahkan konsolidasi demokrasi. Jadi kalau orang membicarakan masalah democratic decline around the world, probably electoral violence contribute to that kind of decline. Tapi electoral violence itu kan bukan hanya terjadi di Indonesia dan Filipina. Tahun 2020, bulan Oktober 2020 di Capitol Hill di Washington DC juga terjadi kerusuhan pilpres di sana. Bisa konyol begitu orang Amerika. Nah, Amerika itu democratic decline-nya lebih parah sebenarnya dibanding democratic decline di Indonesia. Tapi orang Amerika kan hanya melihat Indonesia saja, demokrasinya menurun, ya kan? Nah kemudian satu lagi yang isu besar juga yang sangat mirip antara Indonesia dan Filipina adalah the issue of vote buying and pork barrel patronage politics. Itu modelnya mirip-mirip banget antara Indonesia dan Filipina. Nah, dua-duanya itu adalah proses yang akan melemahkan demokrasi, di samping dengan berkurangnya control of corruptions, judiciary yang tidak independen, law order yang melemah, kemudian birokrasi yang tidak profesional. 2 menit lagi, masih lama ini. Nah, ini kesimpulan saya. Philippines is not a good guide for Indonesia in this context. One, about political dynasty. So, any trend in Indonesia that will provide the trend of the rise of political dynasty at national level or at local level in Indonesia, this has to be watched very carefully. The best history of political dynasty in Indonesia is in Banten. And the chief leader of that one, is she still in jail now? Ibu Ratu Atut?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yes.
and you know that Ratu Atut was the governor, his brother or his sister-in-law was the wali kota, and her mom was the member of parliament, and cousins was bupati somewhere else in the province. So the whole province was occupied. So that will be the best example of political dynasty in Indonesia. But it has been cut off by the KPK. It's good. And the next road not to follow for Indonesia is the trend of the strong families and vis-a-vis weak state situations in the Philippines. So families are above the state. That's the overall situation in Malaysia, in Philippines, that has been endemic. And also the prevalence of private armies or the hired killers in Philippines. And the next one, this is relevant for Aceh. In the Philippines, the incidence of electoral violence related to the legacy or the existing machines available for violence in certain regions. Two things are important in the context of Philippines. One is the NPA, New People's Army. This is the army of the Communist Party in the Philippines, still active up until now in the rural parts of Philippines. And the second one is the army or of the Mindanao separatists. So if you go to rural, the electoral violence will be more endemic in the rural areas where the poverty is high and where the strong rivalries between political families are at the worst. And the next one is the impunities. So any kinds of political killings in the Philippines, you will read the newspaper, the history was very difficult to bring the mastermind to justice. If not possible, it takes time. Of course, we'll find impunity in Indonesia. Easy to find the case of impunity in Indonesia. Okay, so that's the conclusions. Road not to follow. Thank you, Pak Arfi.
Well, thank you, Prof. Tajuddin Pisakro. Well, it seems like a good news. So we can relax for the next Pilkada. There is will no violence. Yeah. But I think that also will a warning to us, because in silence people can do anything without notice. Yeah. And for the next speaker, is Mahmud connected to the Zoom already? All right. So I would like to welcome Mahmud Korea. Right now he is in Leiden and in Netherlands, and in Netherlands till early morning. So he has to wake up very early today. We're so sorry for that, brother. And Mahmud is he took his MA in Leiden and also PhD in Leiden, and now taking some postdoc in several institutions. So he is one of the brightest young scholar in history of Islamic legal texts. with area studies. So that's very our context actually. So I would give you the stage and for the next 15 minutes, please, Brother Mahmud Korea. IT-nya suaranya nggak kedengaran ini. Well, IT, mohon. Sorry, brother. We getting technical issue here.
Okay, no problem.
Okay. No, we hear you. Please. Do you mind restarting your presentation? Thank you.
Oh, okay, very much. All right, thank you very much, Dr. Arfian Shah, for the very generous introduction, and also to all the organizers for having me, especially Professor Bu Eka Srimulyani, for the very generous introduction. I would have loved to be there in person to attend the session, especially not only to attend the conference, but also to enjoy the very beautiful and lovely coffees from different parts of Aceh, especially from Gayo, and also to meet a lot of friends. But unfortunately, I couldn't make it in person. But as the time is very limited, I'll go straight away to my presentation, which is on the Shafi'i Islamic legal texts. So I'll share my screen. All right. So we all know that some of the early Shafi'i legal texts are written in Aceh in the 17th and 18th century. And unfortunately, most of these texts, although they are known to people who are familiar with the Islamic legal tradition, those who studied in Dayas or Pasandren, they might know these texts. But beyond that circle, most of these texts are still uncritically edited, or they continue to be circulated without much attention in the scholarly world. So this is an attempt to look at the texts that are produced in the region. And especially I'll start with a short introduction to my own work, which is looking at the Islamic law, or especially Shafi'i texts across the Indian Ocean and Mediterranean world. So looking at how Islamic law evolved, and especially Shafi'i madhab was circulated in different parts of Indonesia, India, and East Africa. And in the text, it was mainly focused, or in the book, I focused mainly on the Arabic text, although there are a few sections on the Malay and Tamil text as well. As you can see, this is some of the areas that I covered in the work. And therefore, I couldn't pay much attention to some of the nuances in these regions, especially in Southeast Asia. So a quick overview of what I'll be talking about. I'll briefly introduce you to the broad concerns of the text as well as this presentation today. And then I'll introduce 4 Malay texts from Southeast Asia, majority of which are written in Aceh itself. And then I'll focus 3 texts in turn. And then I'll come to the questions of, some conceptual questions on Malay cosmopolis or Malay microcosmos vis-a-vis the idea of Arabic cosmopolis, and then Shafi'i one as well. And then I'll summarize with some textual circulations or the lives of these texts in the Indian Ocean world, and then some other key dimensions as well. So what are the broad concerns or questions that I deal in the book as well as in the follow-up project, which is it is mainly about Islamic law outside the Middle East. So usually whenever we talk about the history of Islamic law or history of Sharia, it is especially for the pre-colonial period or before the Europeans appeared in, let's say, in Asia or Africa. They rarely, the existing scholarship rarely talks about the Muslims or their intellectual or juridical lives in the places like South Asia or Southeast Asia. Indonesia being the largest Muslim country or South Asia being the largest concentration of Muslim population, their histories or their intellectual histories, especially before the rise of colonial powers, have not been discussed. And one of the concerns that I have been having is to look at the kind of textual productions, intellectual engagements of the Muslim communities outside the Middle East. And related to that, it goes with the question of law in the Indian Ocean littoral itself, where people talk, as we know, in the Indian Ocean studies, many historians talk about law, how it was very important for the trade, for the communication, for people coming from different backgrounds, communicating with one another, how law and trust sort of, interchange. But then people rarely have explored how, or what sort of law function in this region. So this is one of the elements that I also look at. And then related to that, we know that across the Indian Ocean, from South Africa to East Africa, Shafi'i school was one of the most followed schools across the Indian Ocean. But the history of the school itself after the classical period, so classical period is roughly about 10th century of Common Era. And the history of the school after the classical period wasn't much discussed. Fortunately, in the last 5 to 10 years, there has been more interest in the post-classical period. So this is also something very useful in order to understand how Islamic law or law in South and Southeast Asia developed. And finally, one concern that I have is on the commentaries. Especially after the post-classical period, we have a lot of sharah or hawashi or hawamish, which all generally broadly identified as commentaries, which all were dismissed as non-innovative or non-original text, unoriginal text. So here I explore these commentaries, especially some of the Malay texts, as we will see, innovative frameworks to explore the Islamic tradition. And within that, I'll focus again on Southeast Asia, particularly in order to see the Islamic legal traditions before the modern period or before the colonial period. So that is in the 17th and 18th century mainly. By looking at the early fiqh texts in Malay as such. Okay, so quickly, 4 Malay texts of Islamic law doesn't need much introduction. Sirat al-Mustaqim by Nuruddin al-Raniri, and al-Raniri doesn't need an introduction, but I'll come to him and the text. And then the second text is by Shakola or Abdurrauf al-Singili, called Muradatul Lab, Bitasil Ma'rifat al-Ahkam al-Shar'iyya. And then the third one is Sabil al-Muhtadin by Imam al-Banjari or Muhammad Arshad al-Banjari. And then the fourth one is Safinat al-Hukam by Jalaluddin al-Tarusani. So except the third text, all the other 3 were, so the first, second and fourth one were written in Aceh in 17th and 18th century. And this is not a comprehensive list of the Islamic legal texts. There are more fiqh texts in the 18th and 19th century. And thanks to Professor Amirul Hadi, who shared with me a few years ago a book written by Professor Erawadi on the intellectual traditions in Aceh in the 18th and 19th century, in which predominantly the engagements are with the Sufi texts, with Tasawwuf, but also there are many fiqh texts. So this is not a comprehensive list, but then we can see some of the major or the early engagements with the Islamic law. Okay, so I'll come to the work by Turasani. I haven't had a chance to read it very closely compared to the other three texts. So in this presentation, I'll quickly go through the first three texts in order to give a brief overview of the kind of materials we have. Okay, Sirat by Al-Raniri, and it is considered as the foremost work of Islamic law in the Malay world, probably the earliest extensive text. Before this, we have some inscriptions and some discussions of Islamic law in the Hikayat literature or in similar literature, but not necessarily an exclusive text on Islamic law. And therefore, Sirat is often appreciated. And then it is also considered as the most copied Malay manuscript ever, with more than 175 manuscript copies, which is a very significant number for any number of Islamic manuscript from any part of the Islamic world, I would say.
Sorry to interrupt,
yeah.
Dr. Mahmoud. I believe you are showing a text on your slide, but from our side, your slide doesn't move.
Oh, I see.
Yeah.
Okay. So let me see. I'll reshare once again then.
So we just we have been saying what the introduction slide only, so we didn't see the text that you were discussing about.
Okay. So how about now?
Still. It doesn't appear yet.
Oh, really? Has it changed?
Still the same. We really sorry for this technical issue.
Okay.
Sorry.
Should I try to rejoin so that it might work?
Sure.
Better?
I think if you have, I think that's much better if you can control your slide.
Okay. So should I send it to you?
Maybe you can. Maybe it's better if you just share the screen.
Okay. Okay. I see. Yes.
Yeah.
How is it now?
Yeah, we can see it now.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah, thank you.
So then I'll quickly show you some of the things that I discussed. So so here is the book that was that came out last year called Islamic Law in Circulation, which I mentioned, and then these are the areas that discussed in the book, and the overview are these areas that I will be discussing, and some of which you already have here, and then the broad concerns, as I said, Islamic law outside the Middle East, and law in the Indian Ocean Littoral, Shafi school of law after the classical period, and then the commentaries as innovative traditions. And then I focus here on Southeast Asian traditions of Islamic law with a focus on early fiqh works in Malay. Okay, so these are 4 texts that I mentioned, out of which I will focus on the first 3 texts. Okay, so the first one by Saratil, on which I was talking before the technical issue was raised. So Sirat al-Mustaqim by Nuruddin al-Raniri is considered as the foremost work of Islamic law in the Malay world and one of the most copied Islamic manuscripts or Malay, and among the Malay manuscripts, it is the most copied. And it was written during the reign of Sultana Tajul Alam, Safiyyatuddin. And Nuruddin al-Raniri, I don't think anyone in the audience needs any introduction because the university itself is named after him, the Islamic University. But what we see that, and also it is very well known his conflicts or intellectual conflicts with the mystical traditions of Hamza Ansari Shamsuddin al-Samarkand. So once we come to the text itself, the Sirat al-Mustaqim, in the beginning of the text, Al-Raniri talks about how the ruler asked him to write this text, especially to make Islamic law or fiqh accessible for the wider people in the Malay world, especially for those who are not familiar with Arabic. And he also deals mainly with the ibadat or the Islamic laws of ritual. So, salat, zakat, puasa, hajj, all these sort of initial issues. And the question then, it's comparatively a thick text. And once we can ask, usually, when we have Islamic legal texts, they cover all sort of different areas, especially in the Shafi'i tradition. Ritual law is only one of the four main elements. The other three being commercial law, criminal law, and marriage and divorce. Then Al-Raniri decided to focus on rituals alone. For him, possibly it was an entry point to Islamic law in order to discuss other dimensions as well. And also, he possibly wanted to educate the local population or those who were familiar with only Arabic on the foundational requirements of ritual. So being Muslim often meant that you perform the foundational rituals, even if you are not familiar with the ways in which, to engage in commercial transactions or other issues. So possibly he wanted to give a preliminary introduction to these areas. And within the textual structure or architecture, he follows the larger chapterization framework of the Shafi'i text, and then he also has certain slight deviations in so he has, even though the work is on ibadat, on rituals, he brings in some other important issues which also might have been very appealing, or that he thought is important for his audience. So he has sections on hunting, slaughtering, or butchering according to the halal ways, or different. He also has a section on Kitab al-At'ima, or on the diverse food items. From that I'll come to the Mir'atul Talibin, Mir'atul Tullab by Abdurrauf Singili, which is considered as the first extensive Malay treatise of fiqh because of its thickness, but also because of the even more issues that were discussed. And also, it was written again during the reign of Sultana Tajul Alam, and which often encourages me to think of, not in terms of patronage, but in terms of matronage of the Sharia texts. And Abdurrauf Singili, doesn't again need much of an introduction for this audience, but we can see that he converged tasawwuf with fiqh, especially the Shataria order, on which Professor Oman Fatahur Rahman, possibly in the audience, also has worked in detail. And also he combined that tasawwuf or Sufi tradition with the tradition. and he often distanced himself from the controversies that were happening in the region. So once we look at the Mir'at, the text itself, half of the text is on the commercial transactions, which is an area that is not covered in the Sirat al-Mustaqim. So he discusses the mu'amalat, and the question is, and also, therefore, it is, I would say, one of the earliest extensive treatises on Islamic law, on commercial law. And it is possibly he focused on the commercial law because of its importance for the maritime trade in Aceh itself. And also, he, apart from commercial law, he also discusses criminal law, inheritance law, and some other topics. And the book itself is structured in terms of like a Tanya Jawab, or like questions and answers, Sual Jawab. And he has focused mainly on the Egyptian scholar from Al-Azhar, Zakaria al-Ansari, and his Fathul Wahab as the main source, but not the only one. He also looked at other texts. And finally, the last text that I will briefly introduce is the Sabil al-Muhtadin by Arshad al-Manjari. This was written in Banjar at the request of the Sultan there, Tahmidullah bin Tanjidullah, written, and it is a commentary on the Sirat al-Mustaqim. And there are, even though it is a commentary on Sirat al-Mustaqim of Ar-Raneri, he takes his own liberty in editing the text itself. And this is primarily because he has a lot of appreciation, but also criticism for the text. And the criticisms are not necessarily targeted at Raneri himself, but on the ways in which the text was copied. And he says that the language is the most important hurdle and possibility. That means, the Malay of Nuruddin al-Raneri, according to Arshad al-Banjari, has a lot of Achenese influence. So Basa Aceh, more than Basa Malay, or the pure Malay. And therefore, he thought, for people from outside Aceh may not be necessarily understanding the text and its meaning. But also, he had very severe criticism of the ways in which the text was copied. And here you can say that he says that it is almost impossible impossible to obtain a correct copy, nuskha yang sahih, ascribed to the author. And a correct copy cannot be distinguished from a wrong copy except by excerpts. And then he also says that many stupid copyists have made a lot of changes in the text, which also make the text very difficult to read. So therefore, he goes on to write the text. I'll quickly come, I think, the ideas of Arabic cosmopolis, which is important here in order to understand, as proposed by Ronit Ritchie. But I'll add to that a Malay microcosmos, or a Malay cosmopolis in itself, in which, Malay also was a lingua franca among several communities, whether from Aceh or Banjar, but also even beyond, up to southern Philippines or southern Thailand, where people across all these places communicated, and therefore exchanged text from these places, and often it also went even up to Africa, as we know, from in the same period, 17th and 18th century. Up to places like Cape Town. Yeah. But Shafi'i school, one reason why it succeeded in South Asia is that because it appealed, or it made use of this Malay microcosmos or Malay cosmopolis, because people like Nuruddin al-Raneri or Shayakola, they managed to write text in Malay, and therefore it could, continue to be studied or taught by the people who didn't know Arabic or Persian. And the school had its own cosmopolis. And we can see that how, the text, some of these texts were circulated across this broad spectrum of Malay cosmopolis. So it traveled in the Shafi'i cosmopolis, but also beyond. So as we mentioned, Sirat attracted 175 manuscripts, and this is not only in Southeast Asia. This is, far beyond there as well. And we can also see, so the previous in the previous speech, Professor Rajuddin mentioned about the Philippines and the connections within Indonesia. But here we can see in the 18th and 19th century how Indonesian or like an Achinese Miratu text was the main source or inspiration for the legal codes in Sulu and Maguindanao. And they clearly mentioned that in the beginning of their code. And Mirat was published as an edition by the Dutch Arabist from Delft University, Albert Muir-Singe, in the 1840s. And all these texts continued to be used in education centers like dayas or pasantrans, but also in the courts and libraries. Yeah. And also, these were used as textbooks in the colonial academies and courts. Finally, we have to think of, what is unique about the Shafi textual production in the Southeast Asia is that there is a royal patronage for the Shafi ulama, which we do not see much in the other parts of Middle East after the classical period. Also, other parts of the other parts of the Indian Ocean world, and it is not necessarily patronage. I would say it is more of a matronage because the first two Malay texts were written under Safiatuddin Safiatul Alam, as I just mentioned. And one thing that I have been looking at to see what are the texts that these. So I mentioned Siratul Miratul Tulab uses Fathul Wahab as its main source, but also it uses many other texts. And from the citations of these texts, can we construct the kind of texts that were circulated in Aceh or in the Malay world in order to construct the larger circulation of Arabic text in this period? And also how Arabic Malay and its variants, sort of came together. As we can see, for example, in the Sabil al-Muhtadin, where the variations between Achenese, Bahasa Aceh, vis-a-vis Bahasa Malayu is a problem, but also it is a possibility for Nuruddin al-Ghaniri in order to switch between Arabic and Malay as through intermittent translation. If we look at the text, we can see often that he has long passages in Arabic followed by even longer passages in Malay. Okay, so that's it. I think. Thank you very much for your attention, and with this I conclude. Yeah.
Well, thank you, Dr. Mahmoud Korea, for the great presentation about the this circulation of the Safi text from outside of Aceh, from Aceh to the other places. We will have a Q&A session for the next 20 minutes. If please address the name of the speaker if you want to sorry. Please address the name of speaker if you like to ask a question. Kita punya ya silakan Ibu. Well, if you want to ask to Mahmud, you can ask in Bahasa Indonesia also because he understands Bahasa Indonesia, I guess, or at least he will practice his old Bahasa knowledge.
Sure. Yeah.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
You know, if in Indonesia, the power of netizen is very strong to bringing down to president. How about the Philippines? This is for the two questions for Prof. Julpan. Thank you.
Can you ask again the first question? Because the first what was the first question?
Okay, the first question is, you are study about the comparative president election in Indonesia and the Philippines. Which one is better or excellent or the best? President election Indonesia or the Philippines? Or no one is the best? The second one, how strong are netizen of Philippines to bring down president in Philippines? You know, in Indonesia, the power of netizen is very strong to bring it down to president. It's like Suharto or Jokowi and so on, like that one. Thank you very much. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Oh, I'm Siti Aminah from Win Araniri, Banda Aceh.
Siti Aminah. Well, thank you, Ibu Siti. I think we collect the question first, then we will answer. Yes, please. Can someone help? Can someone help distributing the microphone to the?
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. My name is Faharul. I am PhD student from Triple IU. I would like to ask a question for Dr. Mahmud Kuria. You mentioned before that a Shafi'i school succeeded in Southeast Asia because of it tapped into microcosmos, as I mentioned, like Nuruddin Araniri and also Al-Banjari right in Malay. But I also heard another another theory like Shafi'i school also succeeded in Southeast Asia because the only school that embraced tasawwuf that was widespread in Southeast Asia is the only Shafi'i mazhab. How do you think about that kind of theory? Okay, thank you very much. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Yes, please. Please, someone help distributing the microphone. Yeah. Well, thank you.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam.
Actually, my question is aimed at Professor Tajuddin, but to be honest, I don't have educational background in the history of South Asia and also in the Philippines. But I'm actually interested to ask you a question about the sort of comparison between Indonesia and the Philippines, which is related to identity politics. Because as far as I know that even though the Philippines has about 90% of the population are Muslim, but I wonder if the religion actually inspire or become the major force in terms of the contestation in politics in president. Because, but I once read the news in 2022 in the very last contestation in the president election that one of the priests actually gave the endorsement for one of the candidates. But Indonesia, I think, in my personal opinion, is very, very scary. Very scary. It concerns us a lot, you know, how the religion really, you know, become a major force in terms of the contestation either in presidential election or in governor election. So how, you know, how the religion, you know, contribute to the rising conflict, you know, in the political issues. I think that's it. Thank you so much. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Well, thank you. The last question, maybe if any, to Dr. Fauzi. Yeah, silakan.
The vernacular media in Java, in Sumatra, quoted this news happened in Sudan. So my question is about the Ratu Adil in Islamic perspective, of religious perspective, and contemporary one as a just leader. So do you think that there are some sort of separation or evolving from religiosity to secular understanding of just leader in Indonesian context? Thank you.
Well, thank you. So maybe I was like, well, maybe another round, if you don't mind, please. I would like to invite Mahmoud Korea first, because you have one question. So maybe I think this answer will be short. So.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, sure. Thank you. Thank you very much for the question. And I believe you can hear me, no?
Yes, yes, we can hear you clearly.
Oh. Okay, yeah. So on the question of tasawwuf or Sufism, and as being one element in which Shafi madhab was or became popular in Southeast Asia, I think it is not a major reason, because we know that, for example, in the once we compare it with the events from South Asia, where the majority of people are Hanafi, following the Hanafi madhab, whether it is in in India or Pakistan or Bangladesh. And here we see again, the very significance or very considerable significance of the different Sufi silsilas or different Sufi tariqas, especially Chishtiya and Suhrawardiyya and so forth. So this was an important feature in, so the association of the Sufism with madhab was a wide phenomenon. And it is not only wide because, let's say the Shafi madhab became important. More or less every person of religious leadership or even religious followership were combining the tariqa with the madhab. So one of the Sufi tariqas they will be following, and one of the madhabs they will be following, and one of the aqidah tradition they will be following. So these three combinations were true for every religion, I believe. And I don't think, the Indonesian tasawwuf tradition has more to do with the popularity of the Shafi madhab in the case of Southeast Asia. Rather, there are other features. So the Malay or the language is one element that I mentioned, but not the only one, again, I would say. It is also has to do with the patronage or matronage, as I mentioned, given by different rulers, but also different kinds of pedagogy, different, so the Pasantrans and Dayas, which often existed earlier. So Pasantran as an institution came into existence much later, but then the earlier forms of centers of learning were also, and also the very practice of teaching these Islamic legal texts in the local tradition. So the writing tradition, the scriptural tradition, and the medium of instruction. All these, being conducted in Malay had a lot to do with how or why the Shafi madhab became successful. And Tasawwuf or the Sufism might have also played a role, but not very different from the other parts of the Islamic world. Yeah, thank you.
Well, thank you, Dr. Muhammad Korea. I think that can answer your question. And I would like to invite Professor Amelia.
Okay, thank you for the question. Well, yeah, you're correct that during the period 18th, 19th century in the Muslim world, there are also the many movement of Mahdism, Imam Mahdi. I think I assume that which is going on in Indonesian history is a combination of the Hindu, let's say, Jasking with the Mahdism. But because sometimes in the text of Jayabaya, we have two figures, the figures of Jasking, and before the end of the word coming the figure of Imam Mahdi. So that's within the text. But sometimes in other texts or any movement, they use the name Imam Mahdi. So it's a kind of complex. It's the time of Islamization period at the time. So a kind of buying ideas, using hadith in certain context of Imam Mahdi and certain context using the Jayabaya Hinduistic figure. So that's what happened. Some figures like Diponegoro, his title is combining two, right? Combining the religious Jasking. They mention Heru Chakra. It says Heru from the higher, higher from the Arabic, let's say. So combining to the religious Jasking. But it is only in limited Jasking cases. Many times Jasking is quite secular. So there was like a figure of Kiai, religious leader, who support this figure of Jasking. That's all. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Professor. And then I would like to invite from Zulfan. This is, I think, yang paling hangat ya, the power of netizen.
Yeah, tough questions. On religion, I think Islam in Indonesia has been more toxic than Catholic and the Philippines. Why? Let's look at the data. The populists in the last two presidential elections in Indonesia used Islam. We call it Islamic populism, and they don't have Catholic populism in the Philippines because they can't use that one for simple reason. I'll show you how they can't use the Catholic populism there. They use different things to exercise populism in Philippines. So populism in Indonesia is Islamic populism. Very much similar with the Hindu nationalist populism in India. The same model of the right-wing white supremacist populism in the US and in the UK, in other European countries. So in Indonesia, the narrative was the Muslim majority has been sidelined by socio-economic progress, and then the Chinese who are not Muslim were the robber of the country wealth, and then that has been used in the last two presidential elections in 2014 and 2019. It was populism, but luckily the populist narrative didn't win the elections. But in the Philippines, there was also populism in the Philippines, but they can't use Catholic or religions as the engines of that populism. If the Chinese are the one who are part of the rich in Indonesia, the same in the Philippines are also the Chinese. But the Chinese in the Philippines are Catholic. The local are also Catholic, and because of the same religion, the intermarriages of the Chinese in the native Filipinos are quite high. So actually, the proportions of Filipinos with the Chinese blood are quite high. So that cannot be used. So what they use in the Philippines? They use Manila, the Manila elite vis-a-vis the rest. And Duterte, with that kind of populist challenging the Manila elite, Manila dominations. Duterte was from the south, from small people from a small city in the periphery of the Philippines. That was the campaign. But when he target, and he was the champion of the poor, but when he target the drugs people who are the victims is the poor. So that's why the trajectory of populism in the Philippines is a lot worse than the trajectory of populism in Indonesia. And don't forget, populism is deceiving. Populism deceives people. So that's something that we need to understand. So this is related to the presidential elections comparing Indonesia and Philippines. Let me declare I am not political scientist. My basic education background is in economics. I'm economist by training, but I moved my field into development studies to be a bit more inclusive in looking at social science. But my limited reading will say that if you compare presidential elections, what happened in the last presidential elections in the Philippines or in the previous one? The win of the populism. In Indonesia, populism did not win. I would say that presidential elections that was won by the populists, where populists is deceiving people, I would say the quality is not better than the one where the populists didn't win. So that would be my answer. And look at the last presidential elections in the Philippines. The current president, the son of Ferdinand Marcos. And you must have heard about the flood of infodemic in Philippines. And the infodemic actually used the social media, influencing people who have a very short memory, a short knowledge about the past. Not the long distance past, but only the very recent past. So the infodemic basically washed the image of the Marcos. So basically this is just to imagine that we have the president in Indonesia, the son or the daughter of Suharto, Mbak Tutut or Tommy Suharto becoming the president of Indonesia. That is happening in the Philippines. How it happened? Through the using a very smart studying the behavior of people in social media and using that strategy to clean the image of the Marcos time. So from that perspective, I think social media in Indonesia, of course you will see the deceiving or fake news or character assassinations, fitna. You will see that one in Indonesian social media, but the counterbalance was quite there. So I would see a better situations in Indonesia in both ground, on the power of netizen side and also on the presidential elections. But let's look at the data. This is a slide that I forgot to show you. This is the data, the VDEM Deliberative Democracy Index for Indonesia and Philippines between 1900 to 2019. The score was very much similar during Suharto's time and Marcos. But what happened after Marcos, what happened after Suharto, the sharp increase in the quality of democracy. It was the peak of democratic consolidations. But the achievement of Indonesia is higher than the achievement of the Philippines in the first few years after the fall of Marcos and compared to the first few years after the fall of Suharto. It was the democratic peak. And what happened after the peak? Democratic decline or democratic deconsolidations. The trends are quite similar, but the level of the peak and the level of the decline in the Indonesian data compared to the Philippines, the Indonesian data is still higher than the Philippines. That's according to VDEM, Deliberative Democracy Index for Indonesia. Yeah. So probably what I have, the way I answer your questions about the presidential elections and the power of netizen, quite consistent with the macro data on the quality of democracy. Yes, the trend is very much similar, but the level of the peak and the decline on both situations, the quality of democracy in Indonesia is still better than the Philippines. And don't forget, Indonesia has been said by much more proper political scientists as the most stable democracy in Southeast Asia. You look at Philippines, you look at Malaysia, you look at Myanmar, you look at Thailand, and you look at Indonesia, what happened. So Indonesia, but the trend is declining, yes, but this is something that we have exactly similar challenge.
Well, yes. I would like to call to open the last round for question, and I will pick. Oh yeah, I think one more round, or we? Okay. One question from Professor Khan. Well, this is the last question, please. Yeah.
Yes, I think we are breaking for lunch, so make it short. This question is for Amelia, but I think it also relates to Mahmud. Hello, Mahmud. Nice to see you online. The question is about the concept of Ratu Adil, right? So do you see that concept to be necessarily male? Do you see, and have you come across in your research in terms of the understanding of Ratu Adil, but from a more feminine perspective or female perspective? And this is where I would like to mention Mahmud's presentation just now when he talked about matronage. So, and he's talking about Safiatuddin. And I think this is where, when you look at leadership in terms of whether it's Ratu Adil, which is interesting, it seems to be based on male characteristics, and it's based on charisma and prowess. And when you talk about just king, but if you talk about just queen, for example, you know, and if you look at the matronage of Safiatuddin when she commissioned a lot of the kitabs, you know, it is generally based more on Islamic piety, and also it was during her time that there was proliferation of Islamic learning and also cultural renaissance. So I just want to see, you know, how do you see that concept? Thank you.
Thanks so much for the very important question. Well, basically, the concept is, as we expected, is more a male concept of Ratu Adil. But in Indonesian context, there are a few numbers of female leaders as the Ratu Adil. So I think that there is a kind of more Indonesianized, I mean, the concept is male, but then the reality, not only male leaders could become the Ratu Adil, so also female. I've seen it in a few cases in Java island during the 18th or 19th century. But if we combine with the previous question from Professor Mehmet about the Imam Mahdi, as you can imagine, it is basically male, yeah, male. So Ratu actually means king, yeah? Raja actually. In certain places become, in the reality, people could choose the leaders as female. So I don't know whether it is very interesting. I will look more into this concept. Yeah, hopefully I'll get more data about this. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Prof. Amelia, and I will ask Stefan Mahmud, Korea.
Yes, thank you, Atian, and also thank you very much, Professor Sharbano Khan, for a very nice question. I wish I was there to answer this in person and to meet you also after a long time. So on this question, I've been thinking a lot about in a different context, although not necessarily from the Islamic legal context. So at the beginning of both texts, Mir'atu Kullab by Sheikh Shakola, and then Ar-Raniri's Sirat al-Mustaqim, we see that they neither of them take any issue with the ruler being a woman. Rather, they are very appreciative. They have this very eloquent adjectives that they use to praise both sultanas, and also so therefore the gender of the ruler, being whether male or female for them, especially both these big scholars of the time lived and wrote their text at the reign of Safiyatul Alam. We see that it wasn't an issue for them. Rather, they were, I think, very appreciative of the rule, as well as the very matronage given by her for the production of Islamic texts, including legal texts. However, in another context, as part of my current project on the matrilineal, I see certain communities clearly, especially for example in the Minangkabau context, where the Tambo clearly mentioning that the woman cannot be a ruler, right? So there are these 5 positions, such as the Kali or Qadi, that is the judge, or the Muazzin, the Imam, and then the Sultan. These are some of, so Sultan is one of these 5 positions that only men can hold, and it might appear a bit ironic or contradictory because the matrilineal societies are often identified as the communities in which women had more, power. But once it comes to political rule or political power, the customary law or the adat itself is more restrictive. And whereas in a context like Aceh, we don't see that kind of, being a problem. Possibly in the adat text, we will have to see if it had clearly any specifications. But I don't think, at least for these 2 others under my focus, it was not an issue at that period. Rather, they appreciated or they praised her role at the beginning of their text. Even though it's a few adjectives, but still, the adjectives that they give to appreciate or to highlight or to praise Safiyatul Alam is important. Yeah.
Well, thank you. Please applause to our speakers. That's end our discussion of the second panel, and I would like to thank all speakers great presentation for the great enlightenment to us in Aceh, and special to Mahmud Kuria for the great force waking up very early. I believe you haven't got breakfast yet, so I wish you were in Aceh so I can treat you a gallon of coffee to make you wake, bro. And me as moderator, please say my apology for all technical issues and limitation. And before I end this session, I would like to invite all panel speakers from first panel and second panel. Our event organizer would like to give you some token of appreciation. Please to the in front of podium. And by that starting, I would like to close this session by Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. And how to give you Mahmud? So can you start?
Take it from me. When you come here.
Yang kedua kepada Pak Syarban, silakan. Disampaikan oleh Prof. Eka semuanya. Iya. Syarban. Bapak Ibu sekalian, sebelum meninggalkan ruangan, ada beberapa pengumuman yang ingin kami sampaikan. Pertama, kepada semua tamu kami menyediakan makan siang di luar sini, bisa diambil makan kotak. Kecuali untuk yang dari Asosiasi Dokter dan Aswadir, kita akan makan siang di bawah di lantai 2. Jadi jangan ambil yang kotaknya. Yang kedua, semua peserta untuk mendapatkan sertifikatnya bisa men-scan barcode di luar, nanti sertifikatnya akan dikirim ke email. Jadi jangan lupa scan barcode-nya, nanti sertifikatnya akan langsung dikirim ke email masing-masing. Tulis nama yang diinginkan di sertifikat. Kesempatannya cuma sekali, jadi jangan salah tulis. Kalau mau sedekah sertifikat untuk orang lain, tulis nama orang lain ya. Kalau tidak mau untuk diri sendiri. Tapi kesempatannya cuma sekali ya. Dan untuk Bapak Ibu yang dari Asosiasi Dokter bisa turun nanti tangga belok kanan ya. Belok kanan, ada ruangan di tangga belok kanan lantai 2, kita makan siang di sana, baik di Asosiasi Wadir dan di Abdok PAI ya. Kita makan sama-sama di sana, termasuk moderator Pak Anton dan Pak yang tadi memoderatori acara ini. Sementara kepada Bapak Ibu yang lain, silakan di luar ruangan sebelah kanan ada barcode-nya, jadi bisa di-scan dan diklaim sertifikatnya akan dikirim ke email masing-masing. Setelah itu di dekat tangga nanti ada makan siang yang bisa diambil. Terima kasih.
Well, Mahmud, thank you very much. I hope I can see you in person.
Sure, yeah.
So
thank you very much. I sign out now, and please come to Leiden.
Oh yeah, sure. Maybe the end of the year. I don't know. Well.
Okay.
Thank you very much,
then.
Mahmud. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Thank you for working
thank
up
you.
so
Thank
early.
you so much, Bu.
Ya, sama-sama.
My pleasure.
Hope to see you again ya.
Yeah, see you again. Yeah.
Assalamualaikum, Mahmud.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi.
Di bawah kita. You can say it again, ya, ada lain. Selain itu kami mengundang juga Bapak Ibu untuk sesi parallel session untuk siang ini. Nanti akan ada 10 parallel session dan Bapak Ibu bisa memilih parallel session mana yang mau diikuti. Dan sesi parallel session itu akan kita laksanakan di lantai bawah.